All right, we are recording.
Okay. This open meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, and the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. I hereby call to order the January 27th meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee at 6 p.m. I am Narissa Wallen, Chair of the Triton Regional School Committee, and I would like to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Erin?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paul Goldner?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Maureen?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Caitlin?
Here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paulise?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Linda?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paul Mayette?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. And Tina?
I'm here and I can hear you.
All right, thank you. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Triton Superintendent Brian Forget.
Here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Assistant Superintendent Kim Croto.
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. School Business Official Kyle Warren.
I'm here and I can hear you.
And Special Education Administrator Dave McGee.
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. For this meeting, the Triton School Committee is convening remotely via Zoom using the information posted on the district's website identifying how the public may join. If you are personally attending by video conference using your device's camera, please be aware that others may be able to see you. Committee members and administrators, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the district's website with the agenda posting unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. Each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that anything that you broadcast will be captured by the recording. All right, so we are into budget season here, and this is our annual budget workshop that we have. And because this is very likely going to be a long night, I'm going to hand this one directly over to Brian. And I hope you have your packets in front of you because I know this is going to be a material intensive meeting.
All right. So hopefully we can be very efficient and maybe it doesn't have to be a super long night. So there was one document that you all should have in your email, school committee members. It was literally sent, I think 45 minutes ago, as we got information this afternoon from the state with the governor's release of his budget. So Kyle's going to go through some detail there, but you do have an email in your inbox with an updated document that starts to paint the assessment picture based on what we're presenting. So we, as the 13-page document is what we're going to use. The hope was developing a document that really focuses on context. Certainly, normally we would be here, actually it would have been at the beginning of the month, over 2 or 3 nights, used to be 4 nights, where the principals who are here with us tonight, thank you for being here, principals, would have each presented individually. Deb Jones, I know she's here, I don't know her camera's on. Tim Alberts all make presentations directly to the school committee for the various, hi Deb, for the various departments across the district. So they are here this evening. I will say Tim Alberts is covering games. So if we do have questions, I believe Patrick, we have his bat phone and we know how to get a hold of him. He can call in if we need him. But I think between Patrick and Kyle, they have a pretty solid grasp of the athletics budget. So to set the context, we are streamlining this year based on the past 12 months that we've all experienced. We finalized a budget on March 11th of last year, 2 days before really the world shut down. I was speaking with someone and I was thinking it was just schools that had shut down on March 13th, but that really was the day, that week, where really everything started to shut down. So everything changed 2 days after we finalized a budget to send off to our member towns. As we progressed through the spring was obviously very different. There was a great deal of uncertainty for the towns. We worked with the towns right through their town meetings, which were, I don't remember exact dates, but later in June. Actually, 2 of the 3 meetings were held at the Triton campus and 1 at Salisbury Elementary. As we went through that process, we brought everyone back to the table through DCC and basically said, is this still something, realizing what has happened over the last months at that point, is this still a budget that you can support? Certainly, we were hoping for a yes. And the discussion around the table was yes. At that point, they felt like they could continue to support the budget. It was something that they had planned for, and there were certainly significant number of uncertainties. But the clear message around the table was we can continue to support the current year, FY21's budget. But when we get to FY22, there's going to be a lot of unknowns, and we know there's going to be significant fiscal challenges based on what we knew was coming with the close downs and the closeouts because of the pandemic. So this budget attempts to honor those discussions and honor that reality. But I think it's also important to note, we go through this process every year. And I know sometimes it feels like a song and dance for the principals because we ask for the moon, and rarely is there ever funding available to fund what we know we really need. But I want to make sure that in taking this kind of stance with the budget, that we're not dishonoring the true needs of the district. We have this discussion each year. I don't want to in any way minimize the needs that we have, and kind of talk about this in the budget. We've talked about this year over year. The Student Opportunity Act was started and funded and then pulled back because of the pandemic. But 73% of the districts in the state aren't going to get really a dime out of the Student Opportunity Act, other than some circuit breaker funding for transportation. So that continues to be the reality. We're going to get back to that fight. We have to get back to that fight because the Commonwealth is not funding education adequately. And our 3 member towns are certainly 3 of the many that don't see the support that they need from the state. But given the context, given the world we are living right now, and the context we're attempting to start developing a budget, we agreed it's appropriate to come in with a kind of a level services mindset, and then move forward, making some presentations on some other needs that might be presenting themselves. Some of them are continuation, while others are new needs, either just because they're new needs or because of the pandemic. So that's the context we are presenting this budget to you this evening. This is a proposal, right? This is not a budget. There is no assessment calculation yet. Again, you've got some kind of preliminary thinkings in that document in the email based on the information we got from the state today. But this is not a formal budget request yet. This is the first in basically 2 more weeks of discussion before a tentative budget is set at a high water mark on February 10th. So I want to make sure that we set the context clearly, that we aren't minimizing the needs. There are still significant needs, and we do need to get back to talking about funding those needs, hopefully at a state level, and not more being borne on the backs of our member communities. But this process this year isn't blind to that, but it is recognizing the reality that we're all facing this year as individual contributing citizens, as well as our towns as far as the tax base. So that is the context for the budget. One of the key factors that is contributing to this year's budget and will contribute into next year's budget as well is COVID relief funding. So there is a summary chart here. And actually, I was thinking I'd go through the context, but do you want to just go through that quickly, Kyle, as far as the 4 funding sources on page 3?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just flip to that real quick. So as Brian mentioned, these are the different COVID relief funds that we've received so far to date, or that have actually today, the last one there listed, the ESSER 2. We just found out officially our allotment this afternoon. But since the start of the pandemic, the first round of funding that we were notified about was the CARES Act ESSER. That's the second one. I'm going to actually kind of walk through these in terms of a timeline of when we found out about them. That's the 215,000 you see listed there. And that was back in the spring as part of the initial relief efforts. Our allotment, it's largely unrestricted, but it does have to be used directly in response to the pandemic itself. Here internally, we split it in half of it going to out of district tuitions relative to anticipated learning loss. Students, special ed students who were currently in district now having to transition to a out of district placement. That was half of it. And then the second half of it was to be used for our second year lease payment on achieving the 1-to-1 Chromebook program. Worth noting that while that was allotted to us back in March, it has a useful life or a allowable spending period through December 31st, 2021. So that's what allows us to utilize this in fiscal 22, again, for the 1-to-1 Chromebook program, as well as the out of district tuitions. The second pool of funding that we found out about was the Remote Learning Technology Essentials funding, RLTE grant, everybody refers to it as. That was 105,000. That was a competitive grant, so not everybody, districts weren't just awarded this amount, we had to apply. So we were thrilled when we found out that the district received that 105,000, and that's what initiated the process of our 1-to-1 Chromebook program for there's 1,000 additional Chromebooks, something like that. So it's a spread out over a 3-year lease. So that 105,000 goes towards that first year lease payment. The COVID relief funding, CVRF, the 502,000, that was again found out that a little more restrictive in nature than the ESSER funding. We've been using that for, actually we fully expended it at this point in time. Initially, that had to be spent by December 31st, 2020. That was the allowable period, but then maybe a month ago, in the middle of December, the federal government came out and said that, no, you can actually continue to spend on this through June 30th, 2021. Getting my dates all correct there. But again, we have spent that full allotment at this point in time. 160,000 went towards remote technology and instruction, things like purchasing the upgraded cameras for the staff computers so that they can teach remotely, as well as a variety of online curriculum programs, things of that nature. 125,000 went towards special ed services. That's directly to help out student learning. And then the remaining 217,000 was for our facilities costs. So the HVAC study that we talked about at length this past fall, as well as PPE, the initial purchase of the cleaning supplies, things of that nature. And then the last allotment, which actually we just officially got word of today, we listed there 800,000 as the estimate, came in at 855,000 that we'll be receiving. So there was a big smile on Brian and I's face to see that come through, because just to really pave the way through into the remainder of this year, into next year, that'll be incredibly helpful. That is similar to the ESSER round 1, where it's not as restrictive in use, but certainly it has to be utilized in responding to the pandemic, whether it be student learning loss, HVAC upgrades, which we've already taken care of, but things of that nature. The guidance just came out this afternoon, and for actually, it seems like there's going to be some further clarification on that guidance as well. So quick backgrounds on those 1, 2, 3, 4 allotments that you see there.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle. So with that context, the majority, as Kyle explained to you, those were new costs that we incurred this year because of the pandemic. So when this budget, the current year, fiscal 21, was finalized in March, it envisioned a very different September than we all lived this past September. When you talk about staffing levels and student enrollment numbers and educational model, need for HVAC repairs, right? So everything that happened wasn't assumed in the current year's budget. So the way that we're establishing our basis, if you will, for developing a fiscal 22 budget is to pretend this year hasn't happened. Grant funding, ESSER funding, technology funding, that all helped fill the gaps in the voids that were created by the pandemic. Additional remote staffing, right? We didn't plan to add staffing to be able to have a remote academy at the K through 8 level, or partner with FLVS, or all of those factors. The assumption in this budget is that our student enrollments and our staff enrollments, if you will, or our staff rosters, return to where we assumed them for September of this past year. So there are a lot of unknowns. I think I probably repeated myself in the narrative here to say the only thing we can really count on is the uncertainty. And so we have to make an assumption. And so at this point, we are assuming that we will return to regular full in-school learning in September. I greatly assume that it will look very different, that masks and sanitizer, and we're still going to be talking about indoor air quality and maybe one-way hallways. And so we're still going to be talking about safety protocols and measures. We're not going to be past the challenges. But I guess I would say my hope and the assumption is, in the way we're basing our budget, is that what we have in place now reverts back to what we assumed we would have had this year with our enrollments and staffing. So by saying that, or while I say that, we have to also say that we have to remain nimble as we were this year. And so one of the key, I would say, funding sources that will allow us, and it's why I literally ran to Kyle's office and looked through the window and was like, yes, right? It actually, we keep hearing these promises, and when the number never came out, everyone was starting to get worried. But that is certainly money that we talk about spending some of it here. We're going to need some of it to close some deficits. We can talk about the food service deficit, and we know that, and we're going to continue with it because we need to provide that service rather. So we know there are deficits we're going to have to use that for. But also it will hopefully bring us into next year with some buffer to be able to say, if we get to September and we still need to provide a remote option, what does that look like? So now we know, hindsight's 2020. If we were setting up, there's certainly things we would do different and better. But I would be shocked if we had the same number of individuals in the remote academies we had now. But the base assumption in this budget is that it goes back to a normal September, quote unquote, as far as staffing and enrollment numbers. And then we have some capacity within specifically that ESSER 2 grant to be able to be responsive and be nimble and adapt as we need to. So as far as student enrollment, we are down, our foundation enrollment is down about 165, 170 students the current year. So we believe, in the majority of the conversations I've had with, and I certainly haven't talked with near all folks who have chosen to leave, but families who have chosen to homeschool this year or move off to a private school for this year. The majority of the conversations I have those folks have been doing so because of the model we have in place this year, and because we're not full in person, and that they intend to return next year. Again, that's 9 months from now, so that's an assumption we have to make. But at this point in time, we're assuming student enrollment restores to roughly the same, and we bring our staffing back to the same levels. So that's the starting point. I should probably stop there and see if there are any questions for the many words that we've already said.
I was just going to ask that. Do you want to take questions as we go and kind of in short breaks? Is that the plan? Okay. All right. So questions for Brian and Kyle so far? Scrolling through screens. Not seeing any. I do have one, Brian. When we were talking about enrollment before, one of the things you had noted was that it appeared that we had students who would have been in kindergarten this year that were maybe holding off an extra year.
Yep.
Do we have an idea of how many students that was? And are you anticipating that they'll come in next year? And, you know, we could have I know we've had like bolus classes in the past where it's kind of like we have a norm in grades around them. And then all of a sudden we'll have a group that's 20 or 30 kids more in an elementary school at a certain grade. Are we anticipating that at all?
So I would say too early to predict. I don't know if you want to go out on a limb and predict, Kim, but so we're currently, the pre-K information nights are literally happening last week, this week, and kindergarten following. So that process is unfolding as we speak. So by the time we finalize a budget, I would anticipate that we would have a much clearer sense of that, but I don't believe we have any data yet to confirm or deny that.
No. Okay. All right. Thank you. Paulise?
Brian and Kyle, I just had a question. Can you please identify an estimate of what the additional staffing costs were related to the remote academy?
In the current year,
Yeah.
it's about 125,000, I believe.
Thank you.
Does that sound about right, Brian?
You know better than me, I would have guessed higher if we're looking at all funds and where staff were charged off to, simply because of the number of classrooms. Is it 9 classrooms now, Kim? So we've got.
Are you talking about the elementary, Paul?
At the
or
elementary,
high
are there
school?
nine different teachers?
There are 9.
Yeah.
9 different sections.
Yeah, we can get you that figure, Paul. I think it's, and Kyle may be
It's about-
spot on.
It's about, just the salary portion of it is about 160,
Okay.
I'd say.
All right. Any other questions from the committee?
Kyle, can I just clarify, that's for assistants and teachers?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? All right. I'll turn it back over to Brian.
All right. So do you guys hear an echo? Is that me?
I hear that as well.
No, it's not. Oh, Narissa muted. It might be Narissa's computer. So with that context, tonight we're combining what I believe I said that at the onset, 2, 3, 4 nights, depending on the year, of presentations to the committee, along with the Saturday workshop. And we're attempting to do that all in one night. Again, simplifying the process, so that should help. But the hope tonight is that we present to you our thinking. Again, these are thoughts. This is not a full budget package at this point, but our thinking on the costs as we go into next year. Have a follow-up discussion next week, and then vote a tentative budget on the 10th. So with tonight, next week, or I would say tonight and next week, these are really the opportunity to ask questions, poke holes. I mean, certainly you got this document and there's new information we're getting today, so we'll have more opportunity next week. But certainly we want to make sure that before we walk out of here tonight, that you all have a clear understanding of what we're talking about and have an opportunity to ask questions. As I mentioned, the principals are here. Deb Jones, Tim Alberts can be available, so that we can answer all the questions that you might have as we look into next year. So that is the focus this year, so that we've broken this up into really 2 sections, right? The first is just setting the context. So we have our fixed costs and things that we're saying we have to do in order to provide a level services, or to provide level services next year. So we always talk about a level services budget. We've used other phrases about the must-haves and must-dos and cost avoidance. So the first section that Kyle's going to go through in more detail are the regular costs of doing business. So that's the things that we have to do if we want the same level of services that we have now next year. Again, with the caveat but we're assuming it's the same level of services that we had planned for September, because that's what the budget is based on. So, so with that said, I'm going to hand it to Kyle. He'll go over those fixed costs, and then we'll talk about what we're kind of, strategic new spending. So we're going to look at fixed costs, the kind of the must-dos, and then look at another section that will look at things that we're proposing we spend money on because they are needs, but they're district-wide priorities rather than building by building. We've collectively agreed that these are the priorities as we move into next year as a district. So over to you, Kyle, or back to you.
Kindly.
I'd say.
All right, so I'll walk through the charts, about 2.5 pages from page 6 to page 8. Again, these are the items we're used to seeing on an annual basis, the cost of doing business. Right at the top there, we have the step increases for all unions, 315,000. This is associated with the 5 collective bargaining units that we have at Triton, those being the Triton Regional Teachers Association, TRTA, Unit A and Unit B. Unit A being the classroom teachers, Unit B, the instructional assistants, of the cafeteria workers, the custodians, and the head custodians. And this number represents movement downward on that salary scale. So I'm very visual picture. We have the salary scale based on your years of service or the years you've been with Triton, 1 through 11. 11 is where it caps. Automatically, each individual on that salary schedule will move down. An example being if you have a master's degree, 5 years of with the district, your salary might be at, I think it's like around 63 at an M5, we call it. Movement to the M6, about $2,500, $3,000 increase. So that increase, we've outlined each employee in each of these collective bargaining agreements, totaled them up $315,000 for contractually obligated movement on those salary schedules. The next one very much related to that. So again, the 5 collective bargaining associations. Right now, the TRTA Unit A and Unit B have a set increases. So in the agreement there, it shows 3 years worth, where it's a 3-year agreement, 3 years worth of salary schedules. The head custodians, and the cafeteria workers, those collective bargaining units are currently in negotiations. We're set to begin those conversations shortly. So we've included an estimate for that in this figure right here. But then for the TRTA Unit A and B, based on those salary scales, that would be in FY21. You have your standard M6 salary, but then going to FY22 for that particular individual on an M6 at say 65,000, it's a 2% contractually obligated COLA. So that increase, again, all applicable individuals is there in the 464,705. And just looking at the two figures, the reason the COLAs are higher is because everybody in those union agreements gets the COLA, whereas in the steps, it caps out at 11. So once you have 11 years with the district, there's no longer movement there. So that's why there's the little disparity. And then COLA COLA, cost of living agreement. Feel free to jump in with any of these acronyms we use frequently. I can detail those out. So all non-union employees, we've estimated a 2%. Typically that's aligned with the other union agreements, TRTA. Non-union employees include administrators, central office staff. And so that is 73,506 for the current year. And if you total the 3 of those up, it is right around 855,000. If we compare it to last year's budget, that number was an $880,000 increase. So just worthwhile context to see them in comparison to one another. Jumping down to the next one, and feel free to interject at any point with questions. Projected column movement. So going back to that salary scale, the chart there. So going down, you have your steps that are automatic each year. And then from left to right, we have our columns based on the for the Teachers Association, whether you have bachelor's degree, a master's degree, 30 credits beyond your master's, 45, 60. And so with each one of those movements comes a salary increase. Our process here is by December 15th of each year, staff members have to submit a form stating if they anticipate moving to a new column for the next fiscal year. We ask that be completed by December 15th for this very budgeting process. So going to an example, if you're at a Master's 6, I think that's right around 65,000, then go to a Master's 30 credits beyond your Master's, that has, say, a $3,000, $5,000 salary increase. That cost we've identified with everybody who submitted a form. This year, we have 108,000 listed. Last year, it was about 38. We've had 35 individuals submit those forms this year, so certainly an uptick there. They're required to submit the documentation supporting those additional credits by September of next year. Salary reserve. So this one, 52,562, we're looking to maintain a salary reserve of 140,000. While that might look significant in a dollar value, our total payroll of about 26 million or so, it's 0.5% of that total payroll. So this gives us a contingency line item for if we make the assumption that we're hiring a new staff member. Generally through the budget process, we assume them to be at a master's degree with 6 years of experience, that $65,000 figure. But say we get a top-notch individual and they might be a master's plus 30. Well, that salary, that increase needs to come from somewhere. So that's what we typically use this salary reserve line item for. Other items might be if this year being, I'll get to it in a few minutes, but with the tech, we might need an additional staff member or additional IA to help with student needs. We could utilize that salary reserve to fund that additional staff member. So the 140,000, looking to maintain that. And then the last item there, FY21 staffing reductions. So this is, we don't typically see this. $167,000 of savings is going to be associated with 2 positions. There's a 6th grade teacher at Pine Grove School and a grade 2 teaching position at Salisbury Elementary School. These are unfilled positions. They were unfilled last year. Unfilled this year, and we don't anticipate needing those positions next year either. So the 167,000, it's about 80 apiece, and that includes the anticipated spot on the salary scale, typically in Master's 6, plus $18,000 of benefits for each. So this was helpful this year. Certainly, you look at that salary subtotal there, 847,000. I thought I had it written down. It was about $100,000 higher than that last year. So despite some increases that we're seeing here, certainly very helpful to have those savings. I've jumped through a bunch. Any questions on those couple of items?
Questions from the committee? Paging through. I have a couple, Kyle. So on the projective column movement, you had just mentioned that last year was significantly lower. That's the aberration, not this number, right? If I remember correctly, it's usually like 60 to 120-ish. Am I remembering that correctly?
It's literally all over the place. I mean, I would say there is no, I mean, it ranges from 30 to, this is definitely the higher end. I don't know if I would say it's the highest, but it's definitely on the higher end. This went into play, I want to say 3 contract cycles ago, so about 10 years. And year over year, we are budgeting against what everyone is saying they're anticipating additional credits or degrees they anticipate getting. So it may come to fruition, it may not. So we would be obligated to make the switch if they get the degrees or credits. So we have to find the money elsewhere if we didn't budget it here.
Sure. Okay, absolutely. I just wanted to make sure. I wanted to see where the change was from the norm. So I guess there is no real norm. Okay. I remember having had one back when Michelle was here that was like 40,000, and she had called that out as being low. That was just where I think had gone back to.
I was
So last year's
to 70, yeah.
last year's figure had about 10 individuals built into it, that 40,000, 10
Okay.
individuals versus this year 35, and that's spread across the TRTA Unit A and B contracts, so both IAs and teaching staff.
Thank you. And on the fiscal year 21 staffing reductions, I know, obviously everything got shaken up this year with remote academies and hybrid learning and all sorts of crazy stuff going on there. Obviously the grade 6 position at Pine Grove School, that would be going up to 7th grade, so totally different thing. But the grade 2 that'll be in grade 3 at Salisbury Elementary, do we not see, I believe, if I remember correctly, that increase was based on both numbers and needs. Are we not seeing the numbers and needs for that Salisbury Elementary cohort anymore?
That wasn't a need that we added. That was actually an existing position that through attrition,
Okay.
the need decreased,
Okay.
right? So Pine Grove was an add. That was,
Right.
we didn't add it. You just talked about that. Salisbury was a position that through attrition, we were able to remove. And the same thing happened at Newbury, but it was the 6th grade. And there were 2 sections of 2 grade levels with 2 sections this year. Next year, there will be only 1 grade level with 2 sections. So we need to add that teacher back. Again, this is assuming that we revert back to our enrollment levels in September. The same thing would be happening again come, over the summer if that doesn't pan out.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions before we move on to another section? All right, seeing none, I'll hand
All
it
right,
back to.
Excellent. Next item there, medical dental insurance. So this is an interesting one this year. So we have about $6.1 million worth of medical and dental costs budgeted in the general fund for both active and retired individuals. I apologize off the bat. There is a typo there for the 5% increase. This $104,416 is a 2% increase projected over the prior year. And might remember last year when we were going through this process, we had a 7% increase in medical premiums. Talking with Maya, our as well as the advisors that we consult with, Maya's come out and said that we can expect a range of a floor of 0.6% decrease in premiums or up to a 6.8% increase. And that's for all of their Massachusetts clients as a whole. Again, talking with our representatives, they said that 2.9 is the average, but we could safely assume 2%. They felt very comfortable with that. And then they also noted that we could see potentially a premium holiday again for next year. They didn't have the specifics on that, but looking at what occurred this year, we had a 50% premium holiday in the month of July. That savings was for both us as a district as well as active employees. So that was certainly very good news. Again, another one where Brian and I were smiling because that can be a budget buster right there. So to highlight
It could
that,
get better, right? I mean,
Yep.
right in the coming weeks, by the time we get to maybe not the tentative budget, but definitely the final budget, it could get better than the 2%.
and also to highlight what we do that to substantiate that number, we don't just take last year and add 2% to it. We look at the January enrollment. So who has the different plans we have are an HMO, a PPO, a high deductible plan, but that we have $700 contribution to a HSA plan for individuals or 1,400 for families. So who's participating in each of those plans, as well as what's our unfilled positions right now. So to make sure that we're accounting for who we anticipate to hire and what the cost of those positions are. So there's a chart in the usual budget document you see in the tentative and the final. We've gone through that same process with this item. And dental is, so that's on medical, dental is actually level. Liability and workers' comp insurance. So 3 different plans there. We have our general liability insurance plan through Liberty Mutual. Our workers' compensation plan is through a company called AIM, AIM. We also have a cyber insurance policy and a student accident policy. Talking with our advisor, he was thrilled on our workers' comp policy because the experience, so our claims experience that we have here in Triton is favorable for our rates. And he was saying in comparison to the industry as a whole, ours is way better than normal. So he was projecting a 2% increase in premiums for the year, and that he felt very confident it would not be more than that. That policy is about $165,000. The liability, the general liability, Liberty Mutual, probably about an 8 to 10% increase on those premiums. So all in all, about $21,000 for that line item increase over prior year. Moving to the next page, unemployment. So this has been a tough one this year. I'm sure all of you have heard about it. The significant fraud that's occurred has made this, through the nation as a whole, has been made this challenging. Triton has not been immune to that. We've actually had about 120 fraudulent claims come through our account. So we've gone through the process of contesting all those. We won't pay $1 associated with those fraudulent claims. But also outside of that, you look at the state of the economy, the number of people on unemployment, we're on the hook. So if somebody worked for us in the past, we would be responsible for a portion of their unemployment. So with more people out on unemployment, our costs go up. Also, the allowable reasons that someone can collect unemployment has also there's been additional reasons why they might be allowed to, where in the past they would have not been allowed to. So again, increases our costs. So we felt it prudent to increase our appropriation there by $10,000. That brings it to a total of $41,000 for that line item. Retirement and taxes. So this is increases exclusively associated with our Essex Regional Retirement System assessment. That's a tongue twister. So $137,000 increase over the prior year. Last year, when we were going through this process, we actually had a $160,000 increase. The reason for that is the actuaries. I don't know how I want to put this. So an actuary comes up with a liability associated with providing these benefits, the future pension benefits for all current employees, as well as all retired individuals as well. And there's a funding schedule that they come up with. Essex Regional has their funding schedule through 2035. So they say, okay, here's our making up numbers. It's more than this, but $100 million liability. We have 2035 to pay this off. Let's take an interest assumption, and here's your annual payments. Actuaries have been, or it's not their fault. I mean, it makes sense, but mortality tables have been changing. Discount rates, interest rate assumptions have been decreasing. So all of that causes the liability to increase. So that's what causes our appropriation to increase.
I'm sorry, I was laughing. It was like, you're definitely a former auditor. Love it. He's like defending the actuaries. It's not their fault, everyone. It's not their fault. They're just doing their job. All right, carry on.
Many a days looking into these actuary reports. So I could talk all day if anybody wants to about actuary reports. But anywho, that 137,000 associated with Essex Regional Retirement. Any questions on that section there related to benefits?
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, on we go.
Excellent.
Please.
Special ed out of district tuitions. So here we have a $206,000 increase over the prior year. Right off the bat, we actually projected as a high water mark. David go through the detail. We have a chart of all the individuals who are either currently in an out of district placement or who we project may land in an out of district placement. That figure as a high water mark was around 306,000 or 310,000. But I was chatting earlier about the ESSER round 1 funds. That stands for Elementary Secondary Education Relief Funding. That's that pool of federal money. We allotted 103,000 to offset those costs for next year, netting the 206,000. And I'll actually hand it over to David. He can talk in a little more detail about that line item.
No, I actually prefer you talking, Kyle. You're doing such a good job. I think you should keep going. You had my head spinning for a little bit on the economics, but yeah. So I think the written paragraph is self-explanatory. So there have been. Just want to remind the committee at this point, when we do the budget, we're trying to project out 17 months from now. So it's not. So as Kyle said, this is the high water mark so far, but we have a lot of students in out of district right now that are sort of on the fence. So we may have some obligations beyond 18. Students that were set to graduate are struggling now. And we still could get more out of district placements in the next. This is kind of like a difficult time of the year for families because of when you hit January, trying to look at transitions. So this, I think, was a a solid estimate of what's happening right now with some understanding that things may likely change. So I think this, at this point, this is our best effort in terms of sort of putting in that number, and then Sandy and I go through this daily or weekly to try to figure out. But I mean, I could literally get a call tomorrow that somebody's moving in between now and April 1st, and we would have to adjust that. But I think, so yeah, and this is not, I mean, again, it's a lot of money, but it's not, we've been in worse positions in the past. I mean, there have been years we've been up over $500,000. So yeah, so I think this is just a, this is the estimate at this point in time, and we'll continue to monitor it and have more information as the weeks go on.
Thank you. I'll jump probably worthwhile just jumping into any questions on that one right now, if anyone has them.
No, it's back to you, Kyle. It's the Kyle show tonight. You keep going.
Questions from the committee? So I guess the one question I do have on that is a Kyle question, or maybe it's a Brian question. And that's that I know in the Student Opportunity Act, the one thing that we were potentially going to see was special education transportation revenues from that. I know I didn't get a chance to look through the budget that in depth this afternoon that came out from the governor, but I know there was a DESE call. Did they by any chance talk about whether that was included in the budget or not?
I do not believe it was. In my understanding, the dollar value, I forget the dollar value they talked about last year, but in any of the narrative that I saw, and Bill Bell or anyone else who was on the call, no one mentioned that the Student Opportunity Act was that aspect of the SOA was being funded. On the Chapter 70 page, it talks about it a little bit as far as what components were. I don't know that it was, and I don't know that it wasn't, but I think circuit breakers up about 10 and change, $11 million, which was roughly the figure to, I believe, I don't remember exactly, but there was no mention of that whatsoever.
So they fully funded SOA in this budget, according to the governor, except that piece then. Who would have thought? All right. Thank
And
you.
maybe it is, right? And so if it is, then certainly over the coming weeks, and I think, I don't know if I mentioned that at the beginning, right? All of this changes, not these expenditures, but revenues will continue to morph over the coming weeks. We set the high water mark on February 10th, and then we have another 4 weeks to hopefully get concrete information from the state. And hopefully it gets better rather than worse, but it will allow us some time to clarify if that's truly the case. We had anticipated in the current year about 100,000 for circuit breaker transportation funding. So at this point, Kyle has not included that assumption in any of this. So that would improve things.
All right. It's a good point. And I know the House and Senate are very aware of this, so hopefully they would possibly even consider adjusting that as time goes on in the budget process. All right, thank you.
Excellent. All right, I'll jump into the next one. General transportation. So this is the yellow, the contract we have with North Reading Transportation, NRT. It's a $46,000 increase over the prior year. And we just renewed our contract with it. Actually, it was last year, just after this time, whereas FY21 through FY25. So that this increase represents the contractual rate increases for the different types of transportation that we utilize. The number itself, so we spend about, the total appropriation is 1.7 million, and that includes not only our yellow bus transportation, but also interoffice courier service, late buses, during exam time if we need some extra bus student transportation, things of that nature. So let's see, worth highlighting is the special ed transportation, since we were just talking about that. Actually, we're projecting level funding special ed transportation, our appropriation from last year, keeping that the same. Looking at the detail again, David and Sandy maintain a spreadsheet of all students all special ed students who we provide transportation to, whether it's graduating seniors, also estimating those students who may need transportation next year, seeing how those offset, and we feel comfortable that we can level that. Next item there, school choice tuitions. So as we've been talking about this year of that ebbing and flowing, certainly a moving target, that number. Right now, based on the information we've been provided by the state, the detailed rosters, again, students who we anticipate graduating, we just wanted to bring that number up slightly this year to a total appropriation of 630,000. We're continuing to monitor that as we get more information and things change, but felt comfortable keeping that where it was. Charter school tuitions, by comparison, in this document, we showed level funding, but information that we received today, we actually think that it is reasonable to project a $50,000 savings in charter school tuitions next year. So that was welcome news today. For this year's budget, by comparison, what was it, last week or the week before? Time's flying. We had just found out updated numbers for the current year. So that gives you some perspective of how frequently these change. Next, general technology. So this is a section that we would normally have a more in-depth conversation about. Deb would give her own presentation, but as Brian described, our approach to the budget this year is level services. So even though Deb isn't presenting all of that detail behind the scenes, we still went through that process. So sat down, walked through the individual line items. We have the charts that show, okay, for contracted services or hardware, software, here's the amount, the individual items we plan on needing to purchase. Within those individual line items, there's some where we're recognizing savings. For example, our copier maintenance contract went with a new vendor this year. So we had a savings of, I think it was about $10,000. But then if you go up to the contracted services line item, we had some additional costs. So that was using to offset. So our non-payroll costs are level funded for the general technology department.
And I was going to say, I meant to mention as we were setting this up. So last year, if anyone is interested in the detail about what goes into each of these lines, if you go to the website about budget fiscal 21 and look at the budget workbooks, whether it's Deb's technology budget or Beth's budget for NES or Nicole's for Pine Grove, all of those line by line, those supply lines, it's got all of the different supplies and materials that are charged to those lines. Likewise for Deb for technology contracted services and antivirus this and subscription that, and those are all, some of that may change, but if there is interest, you know, those watching, if there's interest in seeing the line by line detail, we went forward with those basic assumptions, and there'd be some shifting here and there. But just to make sure if people are interested, that information is there from FY21.
Thank you. Athletics, same concept. So athletic director Tim Alberts and I sat down, went through the detail, individual line items, savings in certain areas using to offset increases in other non-payroll areas. So in this document, you see a $4,600 increase over the prior year. That's relative to contractually obligated increases for the coaching stipends. The TRTA Unit A contract details out the payments for each sport program, athletics program that's offered. There's 3 columns, so 1 and 2 years, then 3 and 4 years of experience, and 5 and 6 years of experience. So as part of that process, we walk through each athletic activity, sport that's offered, who the coach is, where they stand. It also, that chart includes any unfilled positions as well. Worth highlighting for this year, there was some changes that have been proposed. We are proposing to discontinue the middle school basketball program because there's the Triton Youth Basketball Program, which is operated by a separate entity. That program offers middle school basketball as well. So again, proposing to discontinue that those 2 sessions and actually add a high school JV2 girls basketball session. So that way there's varsity basketball, 2 sections of boys JV basketball, and then 2 sections of girls JV basketball as well.
I just want to jump in and say, so nothing in this budget confirms or denies whether that will actually play out. That's based on what Tim is hearing now. I think he said there's 2 other teams in the entire league that are at this point anticipating fielding a middle school boys basketball team. So the cost is roughly the same, but that would be the only significant change. So we felt it was appropriate to highlight that, but that's not definitive at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for including that. So that's comes to the programming subtotal, total $263,000 increase over last year. Any questions on those couple items that we just covered?
Questions from the committee, Holly's?
Kyle, I just have a question. Was there any savings in the athletics line item because of the COVID, like football program that didn't go forward in the fall?
So as part of the so for next year's budget, we have it designed under the assumption that we will be continuing, or that fall football will be offered, just because we don't have the information available. Is that your question?
No, my question is, was there any savings because of the fall programs that weren't that didn't take place?
So that's still anticipated to happen.
Okay,
Yeah, so that is theoretically still on the books, starting late February. That's they call it fall 2 or the floating season. So, so football is still on the docket, cheer, wrestling got moved to spring. So it's still gonna be they just kind of push it down the road. But if whatever doesn't run, we're not paying coaches, so we're saving money, but we're also not charging fees, so we're not collecting. We're losing commensurate revenues when the programs aren't running. So it's pretty much a wash when the programs aren't running.
thank you.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, because just highlighting actually what Brian alluded to as well is that 50% of the athletics budget is covered by user fees, with the exception of transportation. So I think the total budget for athletics is around 350,000 included in the general fund. Then there's another 350,000 that's supported by user fees. So a total budget of 700.
Any other questions from the committee? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Kyle. Where are we at? Operations, looks like.
Yep, just about there to the finish. So custodial supplies and contracted services, we're showing a level funding here. So walking through the budget with the facilities director, Chris Walsh, going through each of the schools as well as the district-wide costs. So over at Pine Grove School, as part of the FY21 budget, there was some one-time costs that were included in there, as well as with the new school being brought up to speed. We wanted to play it safe. So looking towards FY22, those one-time costs, we won't need to replicate. And then we had, I think it was like $15,000 or so we had projected as HVAC repairs, but brand new school, everything's been working out well. So those savings that were recognized for Pine Grove, we've reallocated those to the supply budgets for the remaining elementary schools and the middle school, high school, so that right now all 3 elementary schools have a supply budget of about $25,000, and the middle school, high school has a supply budget of $45,000. And the reason we want to increase those is for in responding to the COVID-19 risks, keeping the building safe, purchasing things like hand sanitizer, disinfectant spray, actually at all schools too, the disinfecting wipes, going through those. So certainly we'll utilize those funds, keeping same concept level funded for the custodial supplies and contracted services. Jumping to the utility services, actually recognizing a savings of 85,000 overall. So those utilities include things like heating fuel, water, electricity, grounds we actually level funded, and waste removal. So looking at the heating fuel line item, of that $85,000 savings, where 23 of it is associated with the fuel. The Pine Grove School, again, new school, is way more efficient than we anticipated it being, the boilers over there. So we felt comfortable trimming that budget back a bit. Same thing with electricity. The experience over there has been less than what we had projected. Being careful on that electricity line item too, of not just looking at last year's experience, because the buildings were closed throughout the spring. So certainly during that time period, we're using less electricity. So we actually went back 2 years, and then Chris Walsh, he maintains a spreadsheet where he, based on the therms, the actual usage that we project needing for electricity, and then the current rates where they're at and any known shifts in rates, he recalculates that out, does a real nice job at it, and felt very comfortable trimming 55,000 off of that electricity budget. So again, a total of 85,000 savings in utilities and other facility services. And that rounds out that chart. So the total there, fixed costs, the cost of doing business into next year is $1,298,977. And so for the next section, strategic needs, Brian, if you want to cue that one up.
Yeah, I also want to point out, thank you, Kyle, for that. I don't know if there's any questions that folks have.
Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
You wanted to be done. I hear you, Kyle.
I have my water, so I'm well.
Are there questions from the committee on the operations section? All right, I have a couple, Kyle.
Absolutely.
I know it was either the ESSER one or the CVRF funding. We had originally used some of that for the like hand sanitizer and wipes and all of that. Is there any particular reason why we're not using the ESSER 2 for that funding rather than taking that out of the lines that you mentioned for the schools?
Yeah, that's a great question. So from the documentation that we've seen so far, it would indicate that would continue to be allowable costs. Just the sanitizer, wipes, things of that nature, because they're directly responding to the pandemic and safety needs. But just looking to strategically utilize those funds and making sure that we're playing it safe into next year, like Brian was describing, we anticipate being back in person learning with added safety measures. But if we have to continue to offer a remote program and having costs associated with that, we want to make sure that we earmark that ESSER round 2 for things of that nature. If at the end of the day we have extra money left out, extra portions of that grant allotment, we could potentially shift those costs over to that grant as well. But
Okay, all right, thank you. And my second question is on utility and services, specifically to electricity. Obviously, we added a lot of technology in the past few months.
yes.
Are we anticipating any increase in electricity usage for charging all of those devices, given that we're talking about 1,000 of them?
Yes, absolutely. So that we had that conversation, and when we looked at, so we left room in that budget for that type of, similar to what we did with Pine Grove School when we opened that up, just playing it safe, making sure, thinking of these what if scenarios. But to answer your question, yes, we thought about that as well.
Okay, so that 55,000 that you were looking at there for electricity, that actually takes that into account.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, all right, perfect, thank you. Any other questions from the committee before we move on? All right, seeing none, I guess it's on to strategic needs then, please.
Yeah, it is one other thing in regards to the supplies, the custodial supplies. I think part of the shifting where Kyle and the custodians and Chris increase the supply lines is that this is the new norm, right? This new norm of wipes and sanitizer and disinfecting is not going away. Is going to, I was saying, it's going to way outlast any of these COVID grant funding sources, right? This is going to be the new norm for the foreseeable future. So it makes sense to, if and when we can, and we have the ESSER funds and the grant funds, great. But we also need to build this in because this is the new norm. So, so that the cost of doing business, if you will, the level services budget of just a tick under 1.3 million. Is a few $100,000 less than it would have been last year. So that's certainly good news. And thank you, Kyle, for going through the detail in doing some extensive due diligence to understand the numbers and standing here very confident in those numbers being able to carry us forward into next year. So with that being the cost of what it will require in order for us to do what we've been doing, we then shifted our attention to some very strategic needs. There are 5 needs, and I'm going to tee it up by ticking the first one off and then hand it off. And I know there are folks with more detail to be able to give you some more detail on the needs. But There are certainly levels of importance. These are not ranked in order of importance, these 5 items, but they're 5 items that we're asking you to consider, and certainly we'll give you our take. And we want to have some dialogue, and over the next week and into the 10th, determine what can and should be part of the tentative budget as we move forward. So the first one I'll take, it's very quick, is full day kindergarten, right? This year, we funded the first of 3 commitments of $75,000 to be able to offer universal free full day K. That $75,000 did get added to the budget this year. Obviously, we are not doing full day kindergarten because of the pandemic, and so that funding is still there, and it is paying for the loss because we don't have tuition coming in either as we move back to a half-day program. But at this point, with the kindergarten information night, the plan, what we're sharing with families is back to full day K. At this point, it's a $2,000 tuition down from roughly $3,000 the year prior. With this $75,000 added, it takes the tuition to $1,000 for next year. And then if we can commit one more round of $75,000, that would be a total of $225,000 over fiscal 21, 22, and 23. That would mean that in September of 2022, we would enroll our first free universal full day K program. So that is certainly something that we have been committed to. I believe that's something the committee has been committed to. So it's certainly something that we need to consider as a very important strategic request. So the next, who am I handing this to? Ta-da, special education. Dave is still with us. So this is a new program. I think it's probably very straightforward, but ask him to say a few words in regards to this new programming need.
Yeah, so I think the write-up is self-explanatory, but we have had over the past 2 or 3 years a cohort of kids that have come in through early intervention that have much more significant needs, really complex with the need, communication needs, intensive therapies, medical care, and assistive technology to meet their needs. So there's currently 4 kids in the district that sort of meet this criteria, and they all happen to be in the same age group, which is sometimes unusual because it's difficult when you just have 1 student, but we have 4 that are currently in the same sort of have similar needs. The parents are all on board with having their students educated within the public school, that's one of my main reasons for putting something forward, because we have to have everybody agree upon that. So these are students who are currently in, they have different special education teachers and different therapists at this time, but we would be putting together a program. We would just need to hire an additional teacher that had specific training and skills to make this, to make the program viable. So again, these are, I mean, first of all, they should be in their home community. I think that's sort of my belief, and I think that's the district's belief for a lot of years based on the programs we've developed. But also, it also makes sense fiscally because each one of these children could be $180,000 a piece if they were to go outside and be placed outside. So this would be a nice, to me, it's a win-win because everybody's on board. So we're not, parents are on board. I don't know if Beth is still here. Beth has volunteered to host a program, so it would be at NES. So trying to think. Yeah, so a lot of these kids already have like, they need like one-on-one assistance or medical staff. So a lot of those staff members are already in place. So it would just be creating a new space and a new, hiring a new teacher to accomplish the, accomplish the goals you want to accomplish. So I mean, in my opinion, it's a must do. I think it's also what's best. It's what's best for the students and the faculty, and it's also fiscally, it makes a lot of sense to do it as well. So I would equate this to people that have been on the committee for years. When we started our ASD programs, when we had a small cohort of kids that made sense, you know, and then this will going back probably 10 years. We started off with 1, now we're up to 3. So we have programming for kids as they go through the grades. So yeah, I guess we have any questions on that?
Questions from the committee? Paul Goldner?
So if I'm understanding correctly, we have these students in the schools now in other programming, but they require more intensive programming. And if we weren't to provide that, there's a likelihood that 1 or more of these students might need to be placed outside the district.
Yeah, correct. So this is also a very proactive measure, you know, because in terms of what could happen as the students get older. I mean, I think we need that, and we need that level of expertise from a teacher who has that specific training. That that I think you know, that would be my recommendation, like going forward. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. That's pretty much.
Well, I think the key point is it would be very likely that 1 out of district placement for a student with this level of needs could very easily exceed this $100,000 price tag. And so if then 2 or 3 or 4 were to go out, where it's literally 3-4 times exponentially more cost effective to run the program internally. And then the far more important factor that Dave mentioned being it allows the student to be educated in her or his own community. So from both regards of just a cost effectiveness as well as the right thing to do. It is, I would say, I 100% agree with Dave. I mean, this is a no-brainer. I would mark this in using older terms as cost avoidance, that it truly is a spend to save money issue.
All right, I saw Aaron next, unless that answered your question, and Maureen was after.
So it partially did. I just want to make sure that I fully understand on this. My question had to do with space availability, and I was just curious if I'm not sure based on how you answered Paul's question if it's already space that we're utilizing or if we're going to have to create a new area, and if NES has that space for this group to work at.
Yeah, so we have so NES does have the space to create the program. So yeah, Beth and I have had conversations before I presented this publicly that's it's also, we would be also, I didn't say that, but it would be a district-wide program. So NES makes sense even in terms of like location, because it's in the middle of the 2, you know, the towns are spread out. So it does make sense in terms of location. There would need to be some extra costs in like supplies and materials and maybe contracted services, but that's already built into the budget we already have. So really the main thing comes down to, in order to implement this, we just need to hire or allocate the money for the teacher. And that would solve a lot of issues.
Thank you.
All right, Maureen was up next.
So Dave, you said that there are currently, I think you said 4 students that would qualify for a program like this, and they're roughly in the same age category. Are they currently all at NES, or are they spread out in the other elementary schools?
So 3 of them are at NES and 1 student is not at NES.
Okay.
So with the one, but the other student is a preschool student, without giving too much information, but it would make sense for him to join that to join that group. So they're all currently getting serviced, and they all have their own individual program. But as they get older, you know, their needs are going to just be more. And again, I should mention though, this is not going to be a self-contained program. It's going to operate much like the programs of students with autism, that they would have an individual liaison, but they still would be included in the classrooms, because the parents of these students very much want them to be included in the school community. So that's why, you know, to me, it would be a disservice if they had to go to an out-of-district placement, because they would be separated from their peers. So that's what I just want to make sure that's clear too. So it's not a self-contained program, but they would get their therapies and individual instruction and then be integrated into the regular classroom as much as feasible or that made sense for the student.
Okay. And so these kids, or this program would be able to service kids K through 6, not just this particular.
Would have to, I mean, right now, we have regulations that say we can't do more than a 4-year span.
Okay.
You know, so you have 48 months, but so up until a few years ago, we didn't really have students that with this sort of presentation. We had a high school program. I think some of you might remember the TALC program that the kids aged out, but just because of the cohort or whatever was happening, we happen to have a very small population that are all within like 2 years of each other. So I mean, if we were to get somebody else who was outside that age limit that moved in or something like that, we would need to deal with that separately. But right now, they would be able to move together through elementary school, and then we'd have to plan for the future. So.
Okay, thank you.
I was just going to add, so this isn't right. This isn't the long-term forever solution. So think about the ASD program, right? We had one classroom. Then as those students got older, we added a younger, and then we added a new. So now there's 3 sections there. So this doesn't forever solve the problem. This solves an immediate need and likely would continue to develop similar to the ASD program.
All right. Thanks, Maureen. Paul Lees was up next.
David, I just have a question. Does this teacher that you're going to hire require any type of specialty SPED or training designation?
Yes, but we also have a lead on somebody who's currently in the district that might be interested in the position. So that has that experience. But yes, I would say this is a person with a specific expertise in that area.
Thank you.
Any other questions for David on this before we move on? All right. Seeing none, we are on to curriculum and instruction. Kim, with
Okay,
you?
I'm like, yay.
Sorry, I was muted. I was going to make a big introduction.
I was waiting for the intro.
Sorry.
That's all right. So one of the big ticket items is the fact that we need to upgrade the current edition of Math in Focus. But before I talk about the upgrade, just to put it in context around what curriculum looks like today compared to even 7-8 years ago. In the past, we would purchase a set of curriculum materials that did not have any type of online platform or independent learning curriculum for students. It usually came in boxes. There were textbooks, there was a teacher manual. And as a district, if we had additional funding or we had the resources, we could purchase new materials when we were able. We are now in a new educational setting where the curriculum materials are, for the majority, a lot really dependent on the ever-changing technology and access to these different learning platforms. We have realized the importance of that flexibility even more so during this pandemic. All of that to say, the Math in Focus materials are, as of 7 years, basically out of date. And so we signed up for a 6-year license that was paid off in 3 years, but those 3 years, or that payment of 3 years gave us a 6-year license. So that 6-year license has expired. And with the expiration of the online resources, all of the consumables for that edition of Math in Focus will no longer be in print. And so when we looked at our different options, we realized we really didn't have any options other than making copies of all these consumable pages and then hoping we could capture certain activities that we could on the online platform and hobble through for the next year. But to give our students a quality math program that had the additional resources that they are going to use, because I just want to also mention that as we're looking at mid-year benchmarks and we're looking at trends across the nation, one of the areas hit hardest for students is in the area of math. And they found that more at the elementary level, even more so than at the middle and high school level. So all of that context to say that our curricular resources and what it looks like is forever changing. So every year we're going to have licenses that expire, and then we're going to have licenses that we have paid off for a certain amount of time. And so we are now faced with this situation where we have Math in Focus. It is outdated, and we no longer will have access to their platform. They've taken it off of flash drive, so it doesn't. It's not compatible with that. We've already run into many problems, and we need to go to the newer version of that for next year. And so that is what you see this increase as far as the curriculum line. Next year, it will not be as significant because we did need to include new teacher manuals. Even though it is online, there is a portion of that that you can get a hard copy of too. So that's what you see there is really the cost for the subscription, as well as a few of the teacher manuals and consumables. So I'm going to pause there and just answer some questions around that.
Questions from the committee? So I have Kim, what happens with grades 7 and 8? Because I guess I'm a little
So,
confused. It's
7 and 8. Yep, they're still using Math in Focus, but actually theirs didn't change as much, and they pretty much use the not the textbooks, but the textbook. And when they reviewed the changes and the benefits, they decided that they wanted to stay with that 7th and 8th grade edition. And I will add that it does shift a little bit in the scope and sequence of Math in Focus, where 6th, 7th, and 8th is almost like a whole new set of materials. And those are pretty much, there's not a lot of changes in those. And any of the changes that the teachers felt needed to be made, they have already done that, last year.
Okay, so do you think we're going to be looking at those at some point down the road, or is this kind of an ongoing, like in other curriculums, sometimes we see a bump like every 7 or 8 years and it's a one-time. Is that what we're kind of looking at here?
I think, well, because we're actually on the schedule to do a whole math curriculum review starting next year. So we will start that next year. We didn't want to accelerate that process by any means. So this is somewhat of a solution to not having, having those old materials that really the online platform isn't even available, the consumables aren't available, to, okay, we can take a breath and continue to use Math in Focus, the newer version, and that will give us time to do a more thorough curriculum review to find out if Math in Focus truly is still the right fit for the district and their needs, its needs.
Okay. And one last question on this idea, because I was trying to wrap my head around this, having done software as a service. The contract we had was for 6 years, but it was for a specific version. It didn't automatically include the online upgrade.
No, so that's because it was new back then. So 6 years is such a long time in the technology field. Now, when you buy in all of the newer curricular that we have purchased that has the online component, it automatically will update the newer edition.
Okay.
Narissa, it was not a sauce at that point. It was, we bought a version.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it was a version for 6. I guess that's where I'm getting lost, because 6 years makes it sound like it's software as a service, but it wasn't.
It's not, because you can use their platform for 6 years. They haven't made any change. Oh, am I muted?
Nope.
No. Oh, okay, I see the mute button up there. That happens a lot. I'm talking, and then after 5 minutes, I'm like, nobody's okay. So yes, after so you get the license for 6 years, but they maybe made some upgrades in the year 2 or 3, but after that they continued to focus on the newer edition, the 2020 edition, and so that really didn't have any new features added to it.
Okay. All right. And is there going to be PD involved here with this move?
Yep.
And if so, is it included?
Yes, there will be some PD. The good thing is it's not a huge change for teachers as far as the Singapore math method. It's still going from the concept to, I mean, from the concrete to the pictorial to the conceptual. So that all of their PD that they have been having over the last 3 or 4 years and they continue to have is around that Singapore math method. What they will need to have PD, and that is provided in that, is really just using the new online platform so that they can really fully use it in a way that's going to be beneficial to them as teachers, but also to the students, and individualize the work that they're doing.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
That's all I had. Any questions from the committee? Trying to do the scroll through as we go. All right. Seeing none. Technology.
I think Erin had a question.
Oh, Erin had a question. Sorry, I missed your hand,
Think
Erin.
so?
That's okay. It went up late. I'm just looking at the items that you mentioned that we will be paying off this year. When do we anticipate that updates will need to be made to them and that we're going to have to address those?
Sure. So those are usually they run about a 6-year license. So those updates, like Narissa said, newer programs, the updates you'll get them automatically. So in 6 years, so most of those I would say are paid off, except for that last year, we have one more payment of that one. And those licenses are about 6 years in term. So at that point, we would have to revisit the curricular materials that we're using, or actually prior to that it expires. And then we would be on another payment plan to pay out either that curricular resource or something else.
Thanks.
So most likely what you'll see in the curricular department or curriculum resources is this constant flow of, okay, we paid this license off. Now we have a newer license that we have to pay. So it's going to be very fluid.
Okay.
Does that make sense, Erin? Are you
Yeah, it
good?
does. I was just trying to figure in my head like when we would anticipate revisiting those
Yep.
costs again.
Yep, exactly. And so it's really, I would say maybe 2 years ago, we started to realize that the pain of subscriptions, as opposed to just getting a book, is going to be evolving, and they're all going to be on different cycles. So we actually have a chart that tells us when the subscription is going to elapse, but we also have another chart or curriculum review cycle, so that every 3 or 4 years we're rotating through the content areas and looking at the subscription, so that when that subscription is up, we can make a determination whether we stay with that or move towards something else. And we do that collectively with a committee.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Erin. Paul Goldner is next.
At the bottom of that section, I see that you wrote that we might be able to offset that with the ESSER II grant.
Yep.
And with that ESSER II grant number coming in higher than originally projected, would that whole $43,000 be able to fit under the ESSER II?
I'll answer that.
Yes. Yes. The only thing I would say is that say there's the initial cost of $84,000. Following year, depending on what we go with, or we have to sign on to this for another year, that subscription cost could be $42,000. I just to put that out there, so that it's not that kind of cliff funding situation where everything's getting paid for this one-time funding source, and then it's not available next year, and we're coming back to say, oh my goodness, we need all of this money because we paid for it from this relief fund. Brian, are you proud of me because I said that?
You're just really good at spending. But yes, so this is currently it's assumed as a one-time cost. So yes, our assumption, and Kyle, when he's modeling things, like we've got big buckets, food service deficit, there's a couple other mitigation, carrying forward into next year. Yes, this was one that we had assumed.
All right. Does that fully answer your question, Paul Goldner? Okay. Anybody else before we move on? All right. Seeing none, on to technology.
I can take that one. So actually, I'll take I'll start off. So With the investment this year in the additional 1,000 Chromebooks to achieve the one-to-one program, comes the added need to support these devices. Certainly, we want to make sure that we're getting the most out of this investment. So twofold, in this section, we're proposing two different positions. The first one is to support the devices, and then the second position, which I'll actually ask Kim to speak to, is to make sure we're getting the most out of this investment and that we're using them efficiently and getting the greatest impact on student learning. So the first part there, to support the devices, we're proposing adding an additional network PC technician. So this role right now, when we started the fiscal year, we had 2 technicians district-wide. I'd say halfway through the fall, we realized that it was just, we didn't have enough available resources to meet the demand of servicing these devices and staff and student questions. We have a ticketing system where if somebody has an issue, they enter it in online and it queues to the technician, and they've just been inundated with these, and as well as keeping up with the devices. So in the current year, we actually, in FY21, we added another position that was funded through available resources in the salary reserve line item. Looking ahead, it's our need to support these devices is still not being met. So we're proposing that we add an additional net PC technician to bring that up to 4 district-wide, and that would align to 1 technician per building, so that we can make sure that we're adequately servicing, I know I'm being repetitive here, these devices. So the next section I'll ask Kim to speak to is for the technology integration specialist. And this is, like I had mentioned, to make sure we're using the devices efficiently and maximizing the impact on student learning. Kim, do you mind speaking to that?
So kind of the vision for the technology integration specialist is really supporting student learning through different technologies. So we have these devices, we have curriculum that has platforms and all of these great programs that students can access. And we've seen the need even more now than ever before, where when given opportunities to be shown and modeled and work with, teachers can do some amazing things with their instructional models, and kids as well. So an integration specialist would really be supporting teachers and students as they begin to enhance the learning through any type of technology device available. In addition, we have created a technology plan, and one of the big pieces in that plan is having a technology integration specialist to help us move forward in that direction. We certainly have gained some traction over this past year, more so than ever before, being immersed in all of this technology. So we don't want to lose that momentum and those gains that we have made. So this person would be critical in keeping up with some of the knowledge that teachers have developed over the last few years to address some of the learning needs, but also to really maximize the impact of the curricular materials that we are purchasing and using on a daily basis.
I just wanted to highlight too, thank you, Kim. The last sentence there, to the funding for these 2 positions. We've indicated that we propose not using the ESSER funds to finance this $156,000 proposal for the reason of not wanting to create a funding cliff, because we do envision these being long-term roles. That this need will not go away. So I think Kim used the example previously of not all of a sudden using grant funding this year and then coming back the year after and saying we need this extra money. So a breakdown of the 156,000, that's including salary and benefits. So our standard benefit assumption is $18,000 per position. So salary and benefits for those 2 positions is the 156.
All right, Thank you, Kim and Kyle. Paul Lee's had a question. Paul, you're muted. You're still muted.
I'm going to withdraw my question. What I was going to ask Kim was just, I didn't see in this technology integration specialist that we have a subspecialty in streaming instruction for the staff. But we're hybrid now, we're headed for full-time. I guess it's not necessary, so.
We'll unpack that.
Any other questions from the committee?
Can I preempt a question and
Sure.
say, if we were prioritizing, right, these are the, now if we can't have everything, the basic need is the support, right? And I think Deb's gonna nod profusely, right? This is about 1,000 new devices. We need bodies, talented bodies, unbelievable staff who are doing round the clock and literally get a help desk ticket response at like 12:37 a.m. So unbelievable work, but there's just not enough of them. So like Kyle said, that is atypical, right? We'll own that. That is atypical that we would add a position in during the year. We actually added that as a temp. And now we're looking to add that as a permanent, what's the word I'm looking for? Not a placement, appointment for the current year, absorbed that in the current budget. And then we need one more. So so I think that's an important point, that this, that is not to minimize the importance and the value of an integration specialist, because we want to make sure if we've made this investment, we then use it really well and use it wisely. However, the most pressing need is technicians to be there to support the significant new devices. Forget about just the Chromebooks, the cameras, the everything else. And I think, I've had lots of conversations with educators who, to your point, Paul, yes, we're back to hybrid, right? As we move to the spring and the fall, we're moving back towards full in-person. Education has changed in regards to how we're using technology, and it's now a resource and a tool that teachers didn't have in their hands. And granted, some would not have been led the way we were kind of forced into this, but now I've had a discussion with so many educators who thought, my gosh, now that this is a one-to-one, and now that when they're back in my classroom full-time, an unbelievable resource, silver lining, that will come of this. So the devices, the need, it's just going to keep proliferating. So we've got to have these technicians in there to support the use. Off my soapbox.
Paul Lee had a question.
I just have a serious question. Kim, this technology integration specialist, they're going to work primarily in the grade schools. Is that what I understand?
In the upper grades, I see them at the middle,
Elementary schools?
the
No.
elementary.
The elementary schools?
It varies, but for me, I see the need at the middle and high school where they can do more sophisticated things with technology. And we're talking about STEM programs, coding. Like I said, I think the sophistication with the technology, more so than just using Google Classroom, like just having more advanced opportunities of using technology within their instruction and content.
Does that answer your question, Paul?
Sure.
All right. Other questions from the committee? Aaron, did I just see you have your hand up? No? Other questions from the committee? All right. I have a couple, Kim. I just wanted to go back to the support technician. No, actually, this is a Kyle question, I think. Just talking, you said one per building. Is that the intent to actually have a technician in each building? Or would it be like it is today where they're sort of central, but then deployed where they need to be?
Do you want to take that one, Brian? I think so. Yeah.
I see Deb is here and unmuting. I hadn't noticed her before, but
We've
Deb's
talked
here
about this,
unmuting,
yeah.
so she probably has the best detail there.
Yes. Well, because we don't have enough technicians now, we do this tech time that I've had in place for a few years where they go Tuesday through Thursday at each, once at each of the elementaries. With one per building, it would be ideal to have them located in each building. Obviously, if there is a need for, a high account or a high amount of tickets in one building for any point of time, they will just, leave for a couple of hours or shift somehow, online. But we will be supporting all five buildings, but 4 campuses with the four techs. But having one in-house is what the principals have been asking me for a couple of years, that they really, really see the need. And we see the need because we run from building to building, and it's just, it really is a need.
Okay, thank you. I had actually heard that too, which is where my question had come from, where both teachers and administrators in buildings had wished that they just had somebody there that was readily available. But I know it's also difficult with a relatively small staff, big district to do something that's kind of that, that's not centralized. So, okay.
Right, and also if I could add that these tickets, when they come in, they're not always answered within a couple of minutes. Sometimes we have to research, then they have to implement, they have to fix the problem, they have to ask questions back and forth. So it gets frustrating on both ends, from the user and also from the IT, is that we can't get to everybody's tickets in a day when they put them in, because it's still going to be there. I want to put that out there. It's still going to be there, even if we do have a person in the building, that some issues do take longer, but having somebody in it's going to alleviate a lot of the problems right now.
Can I just say too, while you're here, in many companies that I've worked in, it was verboten to have the CEO file a help desk ticket. Like, that just wasn't a thing. So kudos to you for making Brian file help desk tickets.
Voluntarily. Unless it's oh my gosh, I need it right now, but I try not to do that.
But
Yes,
still,
we appreciate
that. I can appreciate that. So I guess another question, and this may be for you or maybe for Kim, is I'm just trying to figure out on this integration specialist, is this a teaching and learning position or an IT position, or somewhat in the middle? Like a shared?
I think that person can wear many hats, right? That person could be supporting folks who fill out help desk tickets because it's an issue on the user end. It could be somebody who, like for us, if we're getting math in focus, we have the PD that we pay for, but that person becomes the expert person and is able to run additional PD for that particular grade level or teacher. Or maybe it's somebody at the high school who wants to do some type of outreach program and set up a satellite somewhere and really doesn't know what they want to do, but just has this idea or wants to do something creative to really engage students in a way that they haven't before. And so being able to talk through some of those ideas and develop them around technology, that's really important, as well as just, again, I don't think we've presented our technology plan, but it seems like many years ago, and it's probably changed since then, but there was a lot of work to be done around our, developing kind of a comprehensive plan, but yet also a plan that was fluid and would adjust to the times. I mean, if you think about it, what we wrote last year at this time is probably very different than what we would need to do this year, just because of the pandemic and where everybody is at in technology. So I definitely feel like this person's role would be forever changing, right? It wouldn't be just about fixing devices. It really would be about enhancing everything that we have as far as the students' ability to access and explore curriculum in a way that it may not be available to them now, but even just to help the teacher who wants to use a Jamboard in their classroom and I'm not sure how to do that. So right now they've been great. They've been, supporting each other. We've also been able to pay some teachers who have a level of understanding and expertise to go around and support teachers, but to have one in the building on the spot and be able to provide that support when needed, I think could be very impactful to the learning process and our ability to change.
If I could just add to that, when I had put the ITS position in last year's budget, it was also for the tickets that we keep getting on how do I. They all start out with how do I. And as much as we would love to be the know-all department, we would have to, I'm going to share this with everybody, but my department has this saying is, I'm going to Google it. Why don't you Google it? But we don't say that. What we do is we research, we learn what they're asking of us, and then we teach that person, and then hopefully they're going to teach their peers. But this ITS person would absolutely be of a benefit to be able to handle those tickets, to figure out how to use those, back about 6 months ago, breakout rooms, how to best use those in a Google Meet or in a Zoom. They can learn how to do that and then teach the teachers at their level, because we're going to tell them as an IT person how to technically do it. Here's how you click, here's where you go, here's how you set it up. But to actually take it to the next step of how to use it so that it's productive in their classroom, that's a different level. And that's where I believe the ITS person, coupled with the IT department, can really become a real benefit to the district.
Okay, that makes total sense. So thank you both for that. I just want to say too, I would be remiss at being at the technology point of a budget presentation and just not putting the note in here that I hear from parents all the time at the elementary level, how much they miss those technology instructional positions. And I know it's not on the horizon this year, but I just want to put that out there because it's honestly probably every couple of weeks during the year at least that somebody is just saying to me like, I miss that they have coding, they don't have that anymore, or I just feel like my student, I think it's very different now that they've been remote because they've been kind of forced to use these tools, but that they didn't have the typing skills, that they didn't have, those skills that technology special, so to speak, in the past was usually covering. So I just wanted to put that out there. I know it's not in here and I fully respect that. I just feel like I would be remiss if I didn't say something about that. So, all right. Any other questions from the committee before we move on to extended learning opportunities?
Okay, talk about one more quick adjustment that was made. And also to note that, yes, the instructional technology specialists, I believe is the term, we didn't call them integration specialists, but the ITS folks, absolutely on that list I referred to way back at the beginning at 6 o'clock about the priorities, there's still a massive priority. And so that's that. Also wanted to note that you all know that a couple of months back it was reported Lee DeBobrian, our HR payroll coordinator, retired on sometime December 31st. So Julie Warren, who was our the payroll clerk and also the data clerk, the data specialist, working with the tech department. Julie, through a process, was hired and is doing a fabulous job as the HR payroll coordinator. So in replacing her position, Kyle was able to work with the rest of the business office staff and Julie to support the payroll function so that without adding any additional staffing, the replacement, who is literally onboarding as we speak, trying to finalize that, that person is going to be 100% dedicated to data support. So similar to, like Deb was saying, very excited, right? So it's that, how do we integrate, Kim was talking about all the platforms and online solutions that we have. All of these need massive amounts of data sync to make them work. Clever, you've all heard about Clever now, right? That kind of one-stop shop to get everything. That all requires massive amounts of student data in and out to make sure that it's accurate. So just to make sure that you're aware too, that position, which was half data specialist, half HR payroll, is going to be 100% data specialist now. So that would mean director of technology, we have a network administrator, we would have 4 techs with this addition of a tech, and then the data support person, and then the instructional technology or the instructional technology integration specialist would be that kind of pseudo tech department / curriculum instruction as well. That's all. I'll stop talking.
Okay, thank you. Who's taking on extended learning opportunities?
Back to Kim.
Kim?
Good thing you raised your hand, Kim.
So the extended learning opportunities, obviously we've heard, we're starting to hear very loud and clear that across the nation, our students have certainly experienced some, and you know, it's, the buzzword is, you know, mitigate the learning loss. And some people say, how is it a loss if they weren't even exposed to the instruction yet? So without getting into those conversations, the fact that our students are further behind in the curriculum than they have been, and that is absolutely not because the teachers have not been working hard and the kids have not been working hard. So there's no blame. It's just the situation that we're in. And so then the next step after kind of acknowledging that we are behind in the curriculum is making sure the students are safe and that we're attending to their social and emotional needs, but also to say, okay, what time outside of the school year could we potentially use to provide opportunities for learning? And so obviously the first point would be possibly the summer. And so we are really at the early stages of planning this out. We have a few ideas that we are looking at. One being, I guess, the structure of the extended learning time is really very reflective of the multi-tiered system, right? So you have a tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. All of the kids who in that tier 3 are those students who could be, and they might have been 2 years behind their peers before COVID. And now that may have increased to 3 years. So they would be in what we would call the tier 3. And in a summer opportunity, if they are on an IEP or they have specialized services where they would come in person to a school, they would continue to receive those services as they would in school, as you know, and follow safety measures and so forth. So those types of programming for those very specific students who need that specialized instruction would absolutely get that. But then we have kids who are really in kind of that second tier, if you would. And those are kids who don't have learning disabilities, were potentially, we call them the cuspy kids. They just really needed more time to develop some of these skills and in a smaller group setting. So there's absolutely no way that we could provide transportation for all of these students that would be in this particular tier. So we are exploring the option of the possibility of if these students fit a certain criteria, and that is that they were successful in online learning, that they would participate in what we would call modules. And the modules, and this is really geared toward kind of the K through 6 or K through 8 age bracket, where we would use all of the data that we have from our iReady benchmark assessments, which does a very thorough job looking at where the kids are as far as their skills, and it's all aligned to the Massachusetts state standards. So say a child came out and said, they're 2 to 3 grade levels below in geometry, and they need this specific instruction to get them up to grade level. Now, of course, we cannot close the gap within a summer timeframe, but our goal is to continue to work to accelerate learning through those off school times. So they would participate in that module. The module would be, like I said, the data would come from the iReady. We would confirm with teachers that that truly is what one of the areas that they need. We would have not large groups, maybe 6 or 7 large groups. And depending on the age, they would participate in some type of online instruction, 30 minutes up to maybe an hour with a teacher. And that gives parents the flexibility of not having to worry about transportation. And also it allows some flexibilities for teachers as well, because they could do those live modules in the morning, or they may want to do them early evening or mid-afternoon, depending on their schedule. I think it adds some flexibility, like I said, to scheduling, because I know in the summer when we do offer programs, scheduling is always a factor. And if we can get kids to show up maybe twice from a 5-day program, that's great. We really need a commitment so that we can provide them with some of these learning opportunities. I also think this addresses a need where I'm concerned about staffing for the summer. Our teachers have been, as we all have, right? We are working around the clock, and many are tired. We all are tired. And so to ask them to put in, 4 days in the summer and to come to school and do it over a 4-hour span, this might be more appealing to say, okay, I definitely am comfortable signing up for an hour. I can do it from my home. So I think there is some flexibility and hopefully some appealing opportunities for folks, both at the student and the teacher level. So that's just one idea. I think at the high school, we're looking at offering some type of coursework over the summer for students. And Patrick is having conversations with staff about what that might look like, and would it be different courses, and would there again be some flexibility in how students participated in those particular classes. So all of that to say, there is absolutely a need to offer some type of extended learning opportunities and to take advantage of off-school time, but we need to really think about making sure it's flexible, but also in a setting that is going to work for the student. We certainly wouldn't recommend a student who wasn't successful in a remote setting to participate in this. And the other thing to think about is if you're part of a module, or it would be a half an hour a day as opposed to 4 hours a day. So just making that shift to think, okay, I can join for a half an hour with a live teacher and on a trajectory that really reflects my needs, and that as opposed to I'm part of a regular school day and it's very structured. So those are just some of the ideas. I am definitely in contact with other assistant superintendents in the area and starting to share out what are they thinking as far as extended learning opportunities. But this is just one idea that we've started to talk about and find out what people think about it actually, and if it's a viable way to set up some type of learning program. And again, this is not, I want to stress again, this will not replace in-person learning for students who have specialized programming and IEPs, nor will this be you're on the computer doing a instructional platform and I'm just here if you need help. This is live instruction.
Thanks, Kim. Do you want to handle health and wellness coordinator before we open to questions, or do you want to?
Sure, yeah, yep. So the other thing that we're hearing, and we know this, right? We've talked about this every year, the health and wellness coordinator. We have worked hard to, and I don't want to use the word piecemeal, but really put resources into place on a very small budgets, right? So we have life skills 3 through 8. We have a health teacher at the middle school. We're using PE teachers to implement some of that curriculum. We have PBIS, the positive behavior program. We have class meetings. We now even have a program, a specialized program at the high school. So we have all of these different programs or resources. We need somebody who can come in and look at everything that we have, do an overall assessment, and then talk through what are our needs. What do the needs of the students look like who will be coming back again from this situation? We saw in the survey that parents weren't sure how well their students' social and emotional needs were being met. We saw at the high school and really that there are some concerns with students. And so if we say in our reopening plan that is a top priority for us, and we know that learning cannot happen unless students feel safe and well, and those pieces are addressed, then everything else is going to be a struggle. So I really feel like now more than ever that this position is critical in pulling all of these pieces together and really making sure we have wraparound services for kids where it's needed so that these kids are ready to learn and have the tools to work through situations that could be challenging for them in a social and emotional way.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Questions from the committee? Erin, go ahead.
So Kim, you had talked about, I'm going back to the learning opportunities, the interventions. Do you anticipate that students would need to or would want to take more than one session in the same day? So would it be more than just 1 hour? It would be multiple programs?
Could be, yeah. I mean, I think we'd have to, every student, we would absolutely look individually to say, okay, this is a 4th grader. They could use this module for half an hour for math, and they would actually benefit from another module of 4 to 6 week in the area of writing. And so they absolutely could have 2 different modules. We would make sure it's age appropriate, and that's not to mean like after that those 4 to 6 weeks are up, they could participate in another one after that. So if they had number sense as another area that they needed to work on, they also could pick up 2 math modules. So one for one half an hour and the other for the other half an hour. So again, I think my thinking is around, it has to be flexible and it has to be individualized to the student's needs.
That answer your question, Erin? Good. Okay. Other questions from the committee? I see Paul Lee's next.
Kim, I would like to see you try to rewrite the health and wellness coordinator so that it addresses the health curriculum mandates from the state, and also try to utilize it instead of as being a recurring cost, but being at a COVID-related cost, because you talk about reopening and making sure that it's safe for the students. I don't know why that couldn't initially fall under the COVID funding. That would be my only suggestion.
Yeah. And Paul, you just reminded me too, the state, so the last wellness standards are dated 1999. So with that said, they are expected to roll out new standards next year. Now, I don't know if that time frame has changed, but it will be very interesting to see what the new standards look like. And again, that coordinator would be a key personnel to, again, assess what we have, what we're doing, the impact, and then work with us to meet the level of standards that we should be at.
And just to clarify, the funding source isn't, I don't want to use the word restrictive, right? We could choose to use COVID funding for that, but then we create a funding cliff when the COVID funding goes away. So this is about kind of the strategy. If we're going to commit to it, I think the best approach is to be able to see it as a long-term cost, because I think there's going to be, to your point, Paul, there's absolutely kind of a new reality that we've got to figure out as students return in September. But then beyond that, it's getting back to all the other, like Kim was just saying, updated standards from 1997. A couple things have changed since 1997. So, shifting the focus. So, I mean, the need is extensive. So the only thing I would worry about putting that in one-time funding as we create that cliff down the road.
Caitlin's hand went up and then went down. Did you have a question?
I was actually going to bring up the state standards and how we were aligning to them currently, and then how this person would come in, but Kim read my mind and jumped in there, so.
All right, thanks, Caitlin. Then we're on to Maureen.
So I guess kind of piggybacking then on Paul, can we use the ESSER II money that just came in for the one-time costs, the extended learning opportunities and the high school interventions? Can that be used to cover these two? Was it $200,000?
Yes, that's in the bucket that Kyle has, kind of in big buckets. that is one time. It might last, I forget the exact figures, Kim, but I mean, roughly we're talking about 100 students per building, right, is what we believe we could kind of target. That might be, some of those might be more students for lesser interventions, and some students need more. Some questions about, could you take multiple modules, or is it multiple courses at the high school level? So that could extend into the year, but that is contained to fiscal 22. So yes, that would absolutely be 200,000. And that's I mean, like Kim said, need to involve principals and teachers in this actual planning, but we needed to put a placeholder in the budget as far as what that might look like. So that would take months to develop, but yeah, so that would be one time, very appropriate to put towards that 854, 52, which is looking at today.
Thanks.
Other questions? All right, I have a couple, Kim. The elementary school extended learning opportunities, are you considering those being across schools, or are those within a school?
You could do both, actually. I think it's been a great experience for the kids to meet other kids and other teachers from different schools. I think for me, I think about the teacher and the teacher's areas of expertise. And I don't see that, again, I haven't talked to the principals, but I don't see that being restricted to one school, because if we're looking at 4 kids who need a specific module or pathway, if we're doing it remote, it won't really matter if some of the kids from the different schools.
Okay, all right, thank you. On the high school, are we talking, you had mentioned that you were considering, aside from kind of the standard summer school environment, having those be remote sessions, you envisioning the same thing at the high school?
I don't know. I don't want to speak to Patrick, but they've talked about. I listened to and this is how new it is. One of the presentations that I heard about extended learning is they talked about a 5th term at the high school, right? So this one district was offering a 5th term, which I thought was brilliant in the sense where it wasn't about kids starting all over again a course, right? It's about, okay, these were the requirements, and we're going to work with you the rest of the summer to meet these requirements, so you don't have to start all over again, right? So, and I think that is appealing for kids who the thought of even just erasing all of the work that they have done. So some schools are actually approaching the summer opportunities as a 5th term. So we'll see what is available, but I think we really have to be flexible, but also have a variety of options at the middle school and high school level, because the needs are so different. One size is not going to fit all anywhere. I could put it that way.
Okay. And thank you, because that was going to be my next question, whether these were an entire course or not. So that answers that one as well. And I just want to come back to the health and wellness coordinator, because I guess I'm struggling with this a little bit, because we've had a lot of conversations in past years about BCBAs and counselors and these kind of, I don't want to call them hands-on, because it's obviously not hands-on, but they're like a face-to-face, or I don't even know what the term I'm trying to use here. They're not a coordinator, right? They're somebody who's in the position, like doing that work, whatever it happens. They what?
A direct service, right?
Yes, direct service.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a great way to put it. And I guess my question here is, why the switch?
So if you think of what the direct service people provide, they're really providing interventions and supports. I go back to that tiered model, right? They're working with a very small population who need that level of support, that level of intensity. And so if we think about a coordinator, it's really about looking at, what do the majority of kids need? What can we do at this first level of prevention, right? And part of that is education and giving them some strategies to use so that as they encounter different stress in their life, they have more tools to address those. Because with without those, potentially, they could easily go into more of an intense situation where they need those direct services. And so that's just an example. And I feel like we have so many of these pieces to the puzzle, and those service providers, they will never go away. We will absolutely always need them, but we have an opportunity to take all of these different pieces and pull them and connect the dots in a way that we have never had. And so I think one of the challenges that we face in a district with budget constraints is that we continuously try to, and I don't want to use the word piecemeal things together in a way that is because teachers are working really hard. But we have PE teachers who are asked to teach curriculum. We are bringing in the nurse so that she can teach sex ed to the 7th, and we don't have her for the 8th grade, or we do, but it's for one class, right? So we're really, like, it just breaks my heart that we need to do more, and we need somebody who comes in with that level of expertise. Again, with different things that I manage, I am, and I think somebody said it before in a different conversation about Brian and I are not professional wellness or health people. We are not, and I am certainly not in that wheelhouse when it comes to putting a whole curriculum and support to students. So I think when we're doing a great job with the resources that we have, I think this particular person could really unify all of our approaches, but also identify areas where we don't have anything, and we weren't even aware of that. And so if we could be proactive instead of, down the road putting more and more specialized programs, and I just think for the long term and sustainability, it makes sense.
So I guess this goes back to something that we've talked about in past years, which is if you bring in, say, a BCBA, can then they go work with classroom teachers and kind of help them provide if you're talking about multi-tiered systems of support, kind of those tier 1 supports directly in the classroom. So do you see this person doing any direct services on that? Or are they primarily, I guess, when I think about a BCBA, or I kind of, when we talked about that in the past, I've kind of seen that in, the same kind of framework where a reading specialist would go in with a classroom teacher, and they're essentially instructing along with, right? And then the classroom teacher is improving their level of instruction based on kind of that tweaking, or the advice that person brings in. Is that not happening
I
here?
think there's always, whenever you have a specialist, reading specialist, you're going to have some level of education and professional development that is done with the classroom teacher, right? It most likely will be geared to that particular case, but certainly some of those tools can be applied in a general setting. So that is, again, one part of it, but that particular BCBA person might not have the lens or the knowledge to look at everything from K to 12, not just related to behavior, but related to health, executive functioning. We have the high schools working together to try to develop some executive functioning classes for students. So it really is an opportunity to strengthen what we have, and then determine some needs, and not just needs, but the kind of the roadmap in order to get us, and then the oversight and bringing people together and really making it a real strong comprehensive health program from K to 12.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Before I cede the questions to other people, one last question on that. You're writing the job description. What are you saying that this person needs to have as background?
So I would say they would obviously have to have a wellness degree, and then they would also have some educational background and some administrative background. So I think, again, having that opportunity to speak with the principals, I certainly have my viewpoint from being in the district and seeing what we have for resources to find out what they would think would be the qualifications that this person needs. But it would absolutely be specialized in that particular area.
Okay, thank you. Paulise?
I just want to give a historical statement, and that is that at this time of the year for the, I don't know how many budget seasons, we've always talked about the need for a health curricular person. And now more than ever after a pandemic, we really need this. I think Kim is saying it nicely when she says we try to Band-Aid and pull our different programs together to comply with the state requirements. And I don't think that we're doing it. And I think now more than ever, we really need this position to be fulfilled.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I don't disagree with you, Paul. I just want to make sure that if this is money that we're considering spending, that it's spent in the best way possible, I think. And that's where my questions are kind of rooted.
No, I think your question was great, whether we were talking about a service provider or somebody to overlook it. I think that was a great question. And I think Kim addressed it perfectly.
All right, thank you. Paul Goldner.
I think I just want to make sure that I can clarify this in my head as well. Kim, what I'm hearing you saying is something like, just like we need a K through 12 aligned reading and writing curriculum, we need a K through 12 aligned mental and physical and social health curriculum that ties together in a logical way. And students, as they go through, progress, they're building upon skills they've learned previously. Okay.
Other questions from the committee? Anybody? All right, seeing none. Brian, are you wrapping this up? Because that's the last thing I have on my sheet there.
Yes, so we're at the end. So you have our, again, fixed cost level services request just shy of 1.3 million, 1,298,977. And then the 673,107 are those 5 combined new spends that we just detailed for you. So if we were to fund all those requests, and again, several of those can be offset through one-time funds. I mean, all of it could be, right? But without creating a funding cliff, we know 200,000 of the extended learning and the 42,000 for curriculum right off the bat, $250,000 could be funded through the ESSER II funds, and then we wouldn't be creating a funding cliff to do that. So the total request with all of those requests is $1,972,084. To set the context, the document that was emailed to all of you, and again, I apologize for those folks who are watching this later. I think it got emailed about 5:15 or so. This is information that was published today. So that's the reason you didn't have it ahead of time, nor was it published with the agenda. But just to quickly take you through this, I think the document itself has preliminary, and it's underlined about 12 times throughout it. It's got a red watermark that says preliminary on it to make sure that no one walks away from this meeting thinking that this is a budget proposal, nor is it a figure that any of the towns should yet assume is what the committee is proposing. But what we learned today is Chapter 70, we are going to get $30 per pupil. Minimum, because we're one of those districts, a minimum aid district. You remember in fiscal 21, we had proposed, or we had assumed we would get $30 per pupil. That actually dissolved, and it actually, we're going to come up about 68,000 shy this year for Chapter 70. Basically, today's Chapter 70 figure restores that. So it's basically level funded to what we assumed in the budget for last year. It's off by about $4,900. So roughly it's level to what we have this year is what Chapter 70 is projected in the budget. So that means that there's no, any of these new costs, there's no offset from Chapter 70. For regional transportation, again, very preliminary. We know the figure, we don't know the percentage. Kyle and I were talking through how you do that math to figure out probably about right now a 74% reimbursement. If we do some, Kyle did some modeling out of what that might be as far as our actual cost this year, which is what sets that rate. We're projecting we would lose about $80,000 in regional transportation. Again, that's today, January 27th, 2021. Chapter 70 tends not to see huge fluctuations through the process. Circuit breaker, regional transportation, those are the smaller low-hanging fruit that our legislators tend to go after when a blanket Chapter 70 change can't be made. So there's a very real possibility that that number will improve as we go through the budget process over the coming 7 or 8 weeks. Also, Kyle's going to back off about 25,000 in interest income, right? The same thing that is wonderful for all of your interest rates for anyone who's got credit cards or auto loans or home loans. Wonderful for a refinance for a mortgage, but it is not so great when you have money in the bank. So going to bring the interest revenue down from about 75 to about 50. So all in, we're going to lose about 117,000 as of today. We would lose about 117,000 in revenues over the current budget. So what that means is then the starting point for our assessment to the towns is that the towns have to first make up that $117,000 loss before any new increase that we pass on to the town. Next paragraph down, and the chart almost smack dab in the middle of the page is the chart that we, I always am, I don't know what the right word is, petrified of, or always aware that this is the reality. Anytime enrollment changes in swings, it adjusts the proportion that each member town will pay. As I said earlier, at some point, we lost about 160, 165, 70 students this year on foundation enrollment. I should say that is every district. Districts that are seeing significantly larger enrollment drops, and it impacts them significantly when they're getting foundation aid and they're getting a per pupil amount. Those districts that were going to get millions in Chapter 70 funding with the Student Opportunity Act, an enrollment shift is a massive effect for them. For us, it's not, as a hold harmless district. But it does wreak havoc, and this is one of the things we are perpetually reminding our legislators of to advocate for is, in a region, it matters. Minimum local contributions for a city or town doesn't matter, since most cities and towns are spending so far above their minimum required contribution. For a region, it matters because it's part of the formula. So if you see right there in the middle of the page, with those enrollment swings, Rowley actually lost the largest number of those students. Newbury, the second largest amount, and then Salisbury lost the least. So everyone went down in enrollment. Rowley significantly larger than the other districts. Again, as we go forward and provide the budget documentation, you'll get all the exact numbers here. But at this point, what that does is it shifts Newbury, actually their proportionate share increases by 12/100%. Rowley's drops 86/100, or almost a full percentage of the share, and Salisbury increases almost a quarter or 3/4 of a percentage point to 0.74% more. So at this point, Newbury will be 28.81% of the total share, Rowley 31.11%, and Salisbury, as we've talked about, Salisbury was approaching 40% of the total proportionate share. Salisbury will exceed 40% and go to 40.08% of the increase. So the two boxes down below are, again, I think it uses the word preliminary about 17 times, but it gives you the assessment calculations of what they would look like for those two figures, the level services of 1,298,977, which is a 2.92% increase in our spending. We say this year over year. Our spending increase does not necessarily accurately coincide or correlate with the proportionate increases for our member towns. So a 2.92% increase in our spending yields a 4.11%, bottom right corner of that first box, 4.11% increase to our member towns. However, you can see the way it shifts is that ends up being a 4.5% increase to Newbury, a 1.37% increase to Rowley, and a over 6%, 6.06% increase to the town of Salisbury. If we went and funded everything, or if you voted to fund everything, that's the 192 figure. That would be a 4.43% increase in our spending. That would yield a 6.46% increase to Newbury, a 3.27% increase to Rowley, and over an 8%, 8.05%, almost $1.1 million increase to Salisbury. So that is certainly not the news any year that we want to see. Hopefully, in the last couple of years, it's actually been a fairly even share, that roughly a 4%, 3% is in the vicinity, plus or minus 0.5%. This kind of swing sets up a serious challenge for, obviously, for Salisbury. This is going to be in the towns when we're sitting around the DCC table. I don't want to say we joke about it, but it's often joked about that there's always one town that makes out every year, and it seems to have rolled around year over year over the past decades. So certainly this is the year that is going to benefit Rowley, and Salisbury is going to take the hardest hit overall, regardless of the budget that's finalized. So again, those are not final figures. The revenue, regional transportation, that could significantly change as we go through the process. Again, these figures are hours old. Usually the Julie Kellys and Roger Hatches of the world start digging into this. Roger Hatch, former DESE, is now employed by MASS. Julie Kelly is she formerly MASC or I'm not, Mars?
She's a municipal financial analyst who's now working for Mars.
So she's Mars.
So, but she's done.
Yeah, so these folks will dig into this, right, and get us much more clarity about this in the coming weeks. And then we have to make some educated guesses as we go through the legislative process to see if we're going to anticipate more regional transportation. That's obviously one that we watch closely. And then from there, we will make a determination, obviously recommend to you a tentative budget on February 10th. So that's kind of the sum of what we have to present to you tonight. I think the kind of the lingering question is, I think certainly is there, I mean, my takeaway, I need to have a sense of, and we need to have a sense of, do we all support the level services budget at a minimum, right? Is it at this point, we believe that we need to start with at least carrying services into next year. And then as we look through those other 5 priorities, there are certainly, I think, the full day K is in a category kind of on its own. It is not something that is going to directly this year make a significant impact. It certainly impacts families, right? That's certainly an impact for any incoming kindergarten family, whether they pay $2,000 or $1,000. That's significant. I think that's an important priority. We've talked about this year over year. That is certainly something that we expect eventually, as more and more districts become be moved towards free full day K, that it's going to become legislated, because legislation happens when it or it's approved when it only impacts negatively a few people. So we don't want to be on the wrong side of that, and right now we're on the wrong side of that. So this $75,000 a year, the second year of that, is a wise financial move to keep us ahead of that curve. So that is certainly priority. Special education, we talked about, as Dave mentioned, said very eloquently, we will literally spend multiples of this if these students leave the district. So I feel like that, above all of the spending, is an absolute, should be considered a must do, simply because it's actually going to save money in the long run. We talked about the curriculum. I think we take that off the table and say right now, I don't want to speak for Kyle, but Kyle to this point has said comfortable assuming that cost in the ESSER II grant, and certainly we got about 50,000 more than we thought we were going to. So certainly I think it's comfortable to say, yes, we can take that 42,000 off the table, assume that's in the ESSER grant. Technology, I said it already, if there is a priority, it's that technician over the integration specialist, not to minimize the importance of the specialist, but that technician at 73,000 is a higher priority over the 83,000. And then as far as the expanded learning opportunities, that mitigation, the 2 of the 300,000, so the 200,000, again, to this point, we've got that kind of earmarked within the ESSER 2 grant funding. So I think we can take that off the plate of general fund and say for this point in time, and unless anything else unfolds, that we would feel comfortable assuming that in that ESSER 2 grant, and that, you know, between that mitigation and the curriculum cost that is a one-time for Math in Focus, that still leaves $600,000 taken off that 240-50 off the top. And then I think I would say I think the wellness coordinator is very important, but when we're looking at this type of challenging year, I think there are other dynamic needs that at this point I personally, right, there's lots of opinions around the screen here, I would put that below the other priorities that we've talked about, if we're having to make a decision about what is the most important. So there it is. You have what we have.
All right. So first of all, before we move on into discussion and any additional questions, I just wanted to, before I forget, I want to acknowledge that Kaylee's here too, because I don't know if I missed her in the beginning, but I saw her name when I was scrolling down the list. So Kaylee, sorry for missing you. But I wanted to say thank you, because this is, you know, I know I could have said thank you at the beginning, but I feel like when all this work is kind of spread out in front of us is when we grasp the enormity of what's been done by the staff over the last, you've been working on this couple months now. So thank you to Kyle and to Brian, Kim, and Dave for the work that you've put in on this, to the principals and Deb with IT and Tim for athletics, Chris Walsh. I mean, I know there's so much that goes into this, drilling down into all the individual line items. And it is, you know, it's going to look big when we get that tentative budget book, but even right now it looks big, and I know there's so much more sitting behind this. So, so thank you all for the work that you put in on this. So very, very much appreciated in a time where, you know, obviously time itself is at a premium, and there's a million other things going on that, you know, nobody could have anticipated us doing a budget cycle in the middle of a year ago. I always thought the budget cycles were the most intense part of school committee, and now I know that that is not true.
Yeah.
It feels like the easy part after what we've been doing for the last 9 months. So that said, I will open it up to the school committee for additional kind of overall questions, I guess, if you have those, comments, discussion, where you are at. And I will also note that we have a district communication meeting tomorrow night at 6:30. So for those of you who are have kind of not dealt with us through this process before, we have set in our regional agreements ongoing meetings with the towns. They are required to be quarterly. We traditionally, or in recent years, have made them monthly, so that we're having those conversations all the time. So that includes town managers and administrators, it includes members of the boards of selectmen, members of the town finance committees. We'll have school committee members there, school district administration. So that will be kind of the part 2, I guess, of this discussion that we're having tonight, is what we'll be doing tomorrow night. And then next Wednesday, which is the 3rd, we'll come back here and kind of have a bigger discussion on this document, which will then get translated into the actual tentative budget book, which will be back in front of the school committee on February 10th for the vote, which has to be done by February 15th. And that will kind of set the high water mark, and then we'll move on to the hearing and into the final budget process from there. So that's where we're at right now to kind of set the stage. So I'll open it up to school committee members for feedback, again, additional questions, commentary. See a lot of people probably looking at their notes. Paul Goldner.
I think Brian just basically said this, but if we were to take some of those strategic needs that the ESSER money would go towards, we would not have to send that cost onto the towns. Is that correct? Like that's not a piece of that final on the email we got earlier today that can come off of those town by town boxes.
Yep. So those for illustrative purposes, I guess we'll call it, the 1298 is level services, and then the 1972 is the kind of worst case scenario we painted for you where everything gets charged to the general fund. I'm very comfortable, and I think I can speak on behalf of Kyle because I tend to speak to him quite frequently, that we can pull that 242,000 off. So we're basically down to 1,730, right? 1,730,000. And so yeah, so certainly we can come back, like if that's where we land tonight, we can come back with that modeled and give you a little bit more detail about assessments and all that after we've had a chance. We were certainly, Kyle hasn't gone through this several times, but I have a little PTSD of us having a conversation and then people walking away from the meeting thinking that the committee settled the budget. And then people are, town officials are making assumptions, and that's not their fault. So we try as much as possible to not make this look like anything that looks like a budget, but just some information. So certainly the opportunity to sit, as Narissa said, with the town officials for DCC tomorrow night, get their thoughts, get their feedback, and then come back next week and continue the discussion. I think at a minimum, we pull that 242,000 off the top of that worst case scenario. Yeah. So you can assume, it drops by roughly a third. Yeah. So maybe. Yeah.
All right. Other questions, comments? Anybody? Some of you guys have been really quiet tonight. Erin?
So Brian, I'm pretty sure that we probably talked about this last year, but can you remind me on the phased in free full day kindergarten, did we talk about staffing changes that would be as a result of an increased request for the full day program versus a half day? And whether or not we may need to utilize either of those two sunsetting positions or the two staffing reduction positions to fill a slot in a kindergarten position?
So staffing would actually not change because we're running full day sections, right? The way we were staffed, again, prior to shifting to half day sessions, is all of our kindergarten teachers there was one half day session, I believe, but largely it was full day sessions. And then anyone who wanted half day left at the midpoint. So it didn't change the staffing amount. The 75,000 didn't change staffing. It actually backfilled the loss of roughly 225,000 of tuition. So does that make sense?
Yes and no, but because in my mind, they would have like a morning and an afternoon class with the same teacher, correct? Or am I mistaken on that? Like, would an individual teacher have a morning session for half day kids? They would leave midday and then they would assume a new class in the afternoon.
For full day, all kids would be there all day.
All kids would be there all day. Okay. That, I think that's the part that was still confusing to me. So this would assume that as we're going to make these changes, that everybody would be going to full day kindergarten and then we wouldn't be offering half day session anymore.
So there's still an opportunity to have the discussion, right? That's always the question that comes up. So generally when offering universal free full day K, we don't offer half day kindergarten. I think it's not the ideal, but it's actually worked for those families where we were largely running full day classes, and there was 3-4 students in a section that would leave at the midday point. we'd kind of front load all of the academics in the morning and then make specials and other things in the afternoon. So we can still do that, absolutely, if we were to shift to free full day K, but the staffing doesn't necessarily change. We would just be losing the tuition. And honestly, every year we make assumptions about what the enrollments are going to be. As I was saying, Kim and the principals have been dealing with preschool information night and registration, then enroll to kindergarten information night and registration. So that's all happening now. We could get, Narissa mentioned earlier, right? We could get a banner year where lots of babies happened, right? 5 years ago, and we have a huge kind of bolus kindergarten section in one school or one town. So we're projecting, and that's the same type of thing that Kyle was talking about, that contingency fund. We've added a kindergarten teacher, we've removed a kindergarten teacher, we've removed kindergarten and added a different grade. But at this point, the staffing would not change with that assumption. No.
Do you have another question, Aaron, or are you good? All right, Maureen, you're up.
So Brian, on kindergarten tuition, we talked about how we did a 3-year phase out. Is there a possibility to stretch that out further and make it more than 3 years to help reduce the cost, the yearly cost, or perhaps like put a pause for this year due to COVID, that we would just pause it and not do it until next year? Is that even something that could be?
All possible. Yep. So there is nothing we're required to do. We could take 75 out and go back to a $3,000 tuition if you wanted to. I certainly wouldn't suggest that. But I mean, so there's nothing required here. There is no legislation currently. The purpose of doing this on a phased approach was, I think we're kind of seeing the writing on the wall that this is where everyone is going. And we want to be on the right side of that. What we don't want is to have to put $225,000 into the budget in any one year. That would be a game changer, as far as we would have to be cutting something else to be able to do that if it became legislatively required by law for us to implement that. So that's my only hesitation in backing off of that, is kind of making progress towards that. Even at this, it's another 1.5 years before we're able to say we're a free full day K. But no, we absolutely could, right? We could split it in half and take the tuition, rather than from 2,000 to 1,000, we could take it to 1,500, and then that 37.5, right? Whatever that is, doing the math, right? Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Maureen. Other questions or comments? Crickets. All right.
Paul Goldner has his hand up.
Sorry, go ahead, Paul Goldner.
Since I kind of already asked a question, I was waiting for anybody else, but since there were none, I'm looking at this and I'm seeing that of those 5 strategic items you had, the special education one seems like an absolute must do, because okay, we spend $100,000 or we don't, but we get hit with $300,000 later. I'd rather spend $100,000. The curriculum seems like a no-brainer if we can roll that into Esther. And then the mitigation seems absolutely necessary, especially those ones that are directly COVID related. So I'm looking at it and seeing the same thing Maureen just said, that like the kindergarten seems to be at the bottom of the priority list for these, as well as maybe that technology integration specialist seem to be, like I'm looking at it and saying these are the 2 lowest priorities. Not that they aren't needs, not that they aren't important, but that we're looking at a pretty big increase here anyways. Those would be the first ones that I would look at, saying these are maybe ones that can be delayed a year given the circumstances we're in. That's just where I'm at first glance on this.
All right. Anybody else? Okay. So I guess I have I very much want to wait until tomorrow night to kind of, you never know kind of where your situation is until you have the full picture. So I think I very much want to wait till tomorrow night before I, before we kind of have those conversations, or I participate, I guess, in the conversations about waiting and, kind of what I see where. That said, I just a few thoughts. One is that with all the talking about social emotional learning that we've been doing and, social emotional supports, I came into this kind of thinking we were going to see more of that. And I hope that there's a plan, even if this coordinator position didn't get funded, because I mean, we've talked about this before, that students can't learn if they're, not in a good place emotionally. And, I guess I see putting more weight into the academics, but I'm concerned that if we put a focus here in academics, that without actually providing, that foundation, that we're not going to be successful with a lot of students in those, those academic reinforcements. So I guess I have a concern there. I wanted to note that we're still looking at, I hope we're still looking at the possibility of the surveillance testing program, and that I think as we're talking about ESSER funding, that if that's a direction that we want to go, that we need to be thinking in terms of including that in that as well, and making sure that there's room left for that, rather than kind of trying to load even ongoing items potentially into that grant bucket. And I just, in kind of the long-term piece of this, and I'll mention this tomorrow night too, is that I think that in Rowley, at least, with that big decrease, I know that we've seen almost entire neighborhoods that have gone to Clark because they offer Rowley students a significant tuition discount because they're located in Rowley. But I also have talked to a lot of those families who are doing that for a year and may not be staying there. And I really worry about what's happening here, and that there's going to be a whiplash next year. So we're going to have both a hit this year and a big hit next year in seeing these that kind of proportional weighting of how assessments get distributed between the towns, kind of moving and then potentially whiplashing back to some degree. And we don't have, unfortunately, even though we've had a lot of conversations about assessment methodologies, we don't have a mechanism that we can use to do anything about that. And I don't know if we would use it if we did have it. But I have concerns that could put, because it's, I think we've talked about this a lot, that that when you're in a municipality, there's essentially this one set of finances, and that set of finances sort of guides where your district goes. But when you're in a regional school district, very often it's your town or towns that are getting hit the hardest that sort of govern your district. And these kind of imbalances where things are shifting year to year cause problems for regional districts in that way. And that if we were, I'm concerned about, where we'll be if we're experiencing two destabilizing years in a row, I guess. And again, nothing we can do about that, but I just wanted to kind of voice that concern, because it's something that that leaps to mind when I look at that document that Kyle put out earlier today, that PDF file.
That's a great point. Yeah.
So those are my thoughts. Does anyone else want to contribute anything else? Discussions? No? All right. So Brian, I'm afraid that doesn't give you much guidance, but what I would anticipate then, unless you have other thoughts, would be to go into the DCC tomorrow night And then when we come back on the following Wednesday, to be working from either this document or a more finessed version of this document, if you guys are still kind of doing some internal work on this, and then provide you some real solid guidance at that point to go into the tentative budget on the 10th.
Yeah, I guess my question would be, is everyone comfortable, or is there anyone who's not comfortable with assuming the 42,000 for the curriculum and the 200,000 for the extended learning pandemic mitigation in our ESSER 2, right? I think we're all saying that those, we have to do those things. And ESSER 2 is a viable spending. So unless anyone objects, I think we can come back next week with that assumption. So I guess beyond that, my request would be, is there anything specific else that you would like to see? Other information, other calculations, other projections? Certainly we can, I think after we have an opportunity to share this information in the document, actually the document that Kyle shared out tonight, we can email that to the DCC early in the day tomorrow, just so that they have that. Maybe put one more diagonal preliminary in a different color in the other direction, and then another color right through the middle. But I think, certainly once we've had a discussion with them, maybe we come back to you with a typical assessment page, so we can start looking at that. And Kyle's got his Excel spreadsheet now, so he can with a laptop start plugging numbers in and figuring out if it was 200,000, if it was 100,000. We can start winnowing down. But by the time we leave, as you said, Narissa, by the time we're done next Wednesday, that's the only agenda item, right? It's not a regular meeting. But when after that meeting, where we need to be able to walk out of there confident in what we're going to bring to you the following week as a full tentative budget package that Kyle is already putting together, that's it's going to represent what you want, because you're going to need to vote it that night. It's early this year. It's the 10th. It's just the way the weeks fall. Same with the final budget is by March 10th. So.
Yeah, and I'll just say too, I know Paul Mayette has been through this on the Newbury Finance Committee in his previous position. Caitlin hasn't been through this at all, but I'll just say that the tentative budget, not legally, but traditionally, has been considered the high watermark. So typically that's the highest that the budget would be, and it would go down from there. We've traditionally done that out of, I'll call it, respect to the towns, to not have a gotcha moment, but to say, kind of, this is where we're at right now. We're still working and finessing and trying to figure out what's going to belong in here. But here's at least a number that you can use as you're having your budget discussions to kind of work through, and know that it won't be any higher than this in the long term. And again, not legal, that's just, it's been tradition, and just out of respect to give them a working number for their processes, which are basically going on often simultaneously to what we're doing here. So that would be where we would be at on the 10th. Any other questions, comments before we close for the night?
No questions for the principals?
I know, I'm sure they're sad.
Someone call them. Look at that.
I know.
I was going to say, who's the good dude? Okay, Patrick's going to put the camera on.
All right, so seeing no other questions or comments, thank you again to everyone who worked on these budget documents, and thank you for the committee for coming together tonight. And I know a number of you have already told me that you'll be in attendance tomorrow night, so I will be seeing you there. And can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll
Pauline
second.
and Maureen. All right, any discussion?
Can I just echo the thanks? Thanks for the principals for being here tonight. I know they didn't
Yes.
jump on camera, and the easiest budget presentation in history. And also, oh, wait a minute. I'm glad you put your camera on, Nicole, because I think the original schedule, it was on the schedule to have the principal, the new principal of Pine Grove, come to the February 3rd meeting. And so obviously I shared the information with you for the first time in my experience. Panel, staff and faculty panel, and an administrator panel, and all 22 individuals involved in all of those unanimously after the first round said, please don't waste our time anymore. Nicole's the right woman for the job. So formally, I know you all know Nicole, but formally introducing Nicola Perrier, who is there. I don't know where she is on your screen, but wave.
Right.
So as the permanent position officially as of February 1st is.
Yay. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'm so excited.
So awesome energy, great things ahead for Pine Grove School. So I'm glad you put your camera on to remind me. But thank you to all the principals for being here. Thank you for turning your camera on and waving and saying hi, and to Deb for being here, and Tim for being on call while he's running around at games. Yes, thank you.
And this will be the first and last budget presentation that people could ever do in their pajamas. And I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I would, not going to say anything.
Nope. just don't, Brian. That's
recording still.
All right. That's also the longest adjournment discussion we've ever had.
Shocking, I owned it.
So I need a roll call vote, please. Aaron,
Yes.
Paul Goldner,
Yes.
Maureen,
Yes.
Caitlin,
Yes.
Paulise,
Yes.
Linda,
Yes.
Paul Mayette,
Yes.
and I believe Tina had to go. She told me she would probably have to leave early. Yeah, she's gone. And I'm a yes as well. So that's an adjournment. Thank you all again. And I will see some of you tomorrow. And yes, Kaylee just messaged me and she said, pajama party meetings could be a thing. She's just saying, and I 100% agree with her.
Totally agree.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Good night.